in the system will change. It will be more emphasis and more focus on oversight and control, on controlling the judgments, controlling the decisions, and making sure the decisions are the best thing, not just execution. So at the moment we're using the human intervention to execute the things, the services, to run the application. So instead of that, we might just more focus on just control and oversee. Also, architecture, as I mentioned before, architectures will change, and the focus will be more around cost, more around regulations, more around security from the beginning, and we will see like more cohesive architecture in future.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hamid Wahidi, for sharing that deep insight and joining us on this episode of Trending Tech. With that, it's a wrap on this episode of the Trending Tech. For more tech updates and innovations, stay tuned to NewsX World.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. We'll start with a check of the top headlines this hour. Russia confirms talks with Ukraine and the United States will now take place Wednesday and Thursday in Abu Dhabi. The Kremlin says the shift is due to scheduling coordination between the three sides. Iran denies receiving any ultimatum from President Trump on negotiations. Tehran summons European Union ambassadors after the bloc labels the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist group. Israel says the Rafah crossing will open today for limited medical transfers from Gaza. Only 150 people a day are allowed to exit, with 50 permitted to enter from Egypt. Drones target the airport in northeastern Kisangani in Democratic Republic of Congo. Local authorities say 8 drones are neutralized and no casualties are reported. China sentences former Justice Minister Tang Yijun to life in prison for bribery. The ruling is part of Beijing's broad anti-corruption drive. Right-wing candidate Laura Fernandez wins Costa Rica's presidential election in a landslide. She secures her first-round victory after pledging a hard crackdown on violence linked to drug trafficking. Former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, resigns from the Labour Party. The move follows fresh reports about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Bad Bunny uses his Grammy acceptance speech to denounce US immigration raids. The Puerto Rican star tells the crowd migrants are human and American. Alright, viewers, on to the top story now. Iran has denied receiving any ultimatum from the United States President Donald Trump on nuclear negotiations, even as tensions between Tehran and Washington continue to rise. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson Ismail Baqai said Iran has not received any formal deadline from the United States. He stressed that Iran engages seriously in diplomacy but does not accept pressure or ultimatums. Baqai said such claims by the United States cannot be confirmed. This comes after President Donald Trump said he had given Iran a deadline to enter talks and warned of possible military action if negotiations fail. At the same time, Iran signaled that diplomacy is still moving forward. Baqai said a framework for negotiations with the United States is expected to be finalized in the coming days. He added that countries in the region are acting as mediators, helping exchange messages between the two sides. Iran says discussions are ongoing over the structure and method of talks, with key details now being reviewed. Joining me now for this discussion is Saul Sadka. He's a political commentator from Tel Aviv. Saul, firstly, what's your first reaction to the statements that are coming in from Iran, clearly saying negotiations and deadlines as set by Trump are really not the case true?
Well, hello, Kriti. Good to see you. I would say that the entire Iranian regime needs to look very carefully at themselves and about what has happened in the past. And every time that Trump has set them ultimatums, and they have pretended that they aren't ultimatums, and they've refused to negotiate, or they have dragged out the negotiations, they have paid the price. The sanctions have been renewed. They were bombed in June. The nuclear program all but destroyed, probably beyond repair. And again, they are playing this game out of pride, perhaps, or because they realize that without the weapons that the Americans are demanding that they hand over, they have no future, because they will eventually, if not immediately, be rolled over by their own people.
But what's making Donald Trump hopeful of talks and negotiations when Khamenei has warned of a wider war in the region should Trump, United States, intervene with strikes?
The United States has an economy approximately 100 times more powerful and strong than Iran. The Iranians don't have a serious navy of any kind. They don't have an air force. The Americans have by far
in prison over taking bribes. Earlier in 2024, the Central Commission
single aircraft within a few hours if they wanted to. And they wouldn't even need the build-up they currently have near Iran to do that. They could do it simply by sending bombers from the United States mainland. The Americans have the Iranians cornered in a tiny, tiny little box. And there's really nothing that they can do except whine and beg for mercy. And beg for mercy is exactly what they should be doing if they were smart. Otherwise, my guess is that at some point, perhaps within the next week, perhaps within the next month, but certainly within the next few months, the Iranian regime will very much regret not taking whatever ultimatum they claim they haven't been offered, but clearly have.
How do you view the naval exercises that Tehran has announced in the Strait of Hormuz? Is it also possible that it would lay mines there in the Gulf? And what then happens if Iran also retaliates to any possible aggression from the United States?
They have been threatening to do this, to close the Strait of Hormuz for decades at this point. They might be able to do it with a couple of mines, but that would be extremely temporary. The oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf is of no great interest to the Americans either. The oil that now comes out of the Persian Gulf, the vast majority heads east towards India and China. It is India and China who would pay the price of any Iranian act like that, and of course Iran themselves would pay that price. But again, there's really not much they can do, because anything they could possibly lay, any kind of closure they could impose on the Strait of Hormuz, could be rectified and undone within a matter of weeks or at most months.
Do you think India is actually going to shift buying oil from Iran to Venezuela? Trump has said.
Well, absolutely. The Indians, as you well know, have been warned in the past that if they continue to buy oil at discounts from sanctioned nations like Iran and Russia, then they will be sanctioned. They will end up with tariffs on their exports, which would be very bad for India. I think some of those are already in place, if I'm not mistaken. So the offer for them to essentially buy now oil from Venezuela under a US system, Venezuela's oil essentially becoming a sort of economic vassal of the United States, would be very good for everyone. It's a win-win. Certainly for India. China might not like it, but it would solve its problem. If you recall, China in particular has almost no oil source. It has by far the largest consumer of oil. Its entire economy is dependent on a ready flow of hydrocarbons. And if anything were to disrupt that, that would be very, very bad for them. In fact, it would probably be, within a matter of months, the end of the Chinese miracle, as it is called. So they are very nervous. They certainly want stability, and they probably don't really care what happens to the Iranian regime. It makes little difference to them if the Iranian regime is an Islamic theocracy, or a monarchy, or a liberal democracy one day. They simply want the oil to flow calmly and cleanly out of the Gulf and into their power plants, so they can keep manufacturing the products that they need to stay afloat in this difficult and changing world.
All right, so I'll do stay on with me. There's some more information coming in. Viewers, now the Kremlin has also said that it offered its help in removing irritants from the Iran situation long ago, adding that it remains committed to de-escalating tension. That's in fact breaking news information that's coming in. Kremlin is offering to de-escalate Iran tensions, and in a statement released just moments ago, Kremlin stressed that it continues to work on reducing the strain around Iran, particularly in relation to uranium enrichment. Moscow's ongoing efforts are aimed at finding a diplomatic solution to the crisis as concerns rise over potential military escalation. The Kremlin's involvement highlights Russia's role as a key mediator in the region alongside other international actors trying to calm the situation. All right, I request Saul to join me back in the discussion here. Saul, what really happens to Iran-Russia relations if Iran has to stop on building its nuclear arsenal, if that really comes out as the outcome of the talks between US and Iran? Because what will Russia then really have to gain from a partnership with Iran?
Well, Russia would very much like Iran to maintain its current status as an Islamic republic. Russia has almost no useful allies left in the world. They are currently importing weapons from North Korea and Iran primarily to fund their ridiculous World War I style war in eastern Ukraine that is burning, in the long run, is burning their economy and their population to the ground and will end up eventually in the breakup of the Russian Federation into its constituent nations. So they want to keep things stable in Iran, but at the same time, they can't really help Iran in any major way. If you recall, Iranian air defenses were of primarily Russian origin, except for the ones that were from China or homemade, but they were all copies of the Russian equipment. And we saw how well those held up against Western weapons in June. They were all knocked out within hours. And then the Israelis and then the Americans had free reign of Iranian airspace from then on. So there's really no match between the kind of help that Russia can give and the kind of help that Iran needs in practice. But it could be that Russia might be able to pull off some kind of mediation relevance out of a deal like this if they could be the ones to guarantee the Trump demands of the removal of all of the uranium back out of the country and the disarmament of most of its ballistic missile arsenal, and also the defunding and disarmament of Iran's crazy proxies across the region. Those are the three primary demands that Trump has for the Iranians. If Russia can play a part in that by perhaps being the ones to take custody of the approximately 600 kilos of uranium the Iranians are understood to have, that would be certainly a good thing. And if that would happen, it would be good for Russia too, because it would preserve the Iranian ally, such as it is, arms supplier, whatever you want to call them. It would be very bad for the Iranian people, as it would further embed the Iranian regime in place. Although their end is inevitable at this point. There's no way that a regime that has slaughtered 35,000 of its own people protesting in the streets is really going to have any place on the world stage. But it could help them hold out for a few more years, which would also be good for Russia, and it would give Russia some prestige. I assume that's what's happening here.
All right. What we know for Iran's uranium enrichment solved as of now is that about 400 kilogram of uranium has already been enriched to up to 60%. It won't take very long from to take that 60% to 90%, and then for Iran to have its own nuclear weapons. Realistically speaking, because Iran never really stopped on its nuclear programs, where do you think it currently stands with its nuclear ambitions?
I'm certain that the bulk of the core of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards want to continue their nuclear program. The problem that they have is that most of their equipment, if not all of it, all the significant equipment is now destroyed, buried under mountains. And where the uranium is, we do not know, the public do not know, but I assure you, it's child's play for the Mossad and the CIA to figure out exactly where that is. Because uranium, wherever it's stored, it leaves traces all over the place. So they know where it is. And they have full eye in the sky capability over Iran with drones and satellites at all times. There's no question in my mind that the Americans know exactly where the uranium is and who is controlling it and how to dispose of it if that's what they want to do. And my guess is the Iranians know the Americans know that too. And they're aware that if they try any funny business, if they try and move it around or get their program up and running, they will be met with immediate kinetic strikes, rendering it useless and eliminating anyone that was involved. So my assumption at this point.
All right, sure. Saul, do stay on with me once again as we proceed. There's some more news coming in from Iran. Viewers, Iran has now arrested 4 foreigners for alleged participation in recent riots, as per state television. Tehran continues a massive crackdown on unrest across the country. Official media and security forces have also detained thousands of protesters in one of the bloodiest suppression campaigns in Iran's modern history, with rights groups reporting mass arrests and numerous casualties. The arrests of foreign nationals also come amid intensifying tension between the United States and Iran, with Iranian officials blaming foreign-backed forces for fueling the unrest and US political leaders expressing support for demonstrators. State media have shown large pro-government rallies and framed the situation as a multi-front struggle against external pressure from the US and Israel, underscoring deepening geopolitical strains. The crackdown and international dimension of the unrest have added to an already fragile relationship between Washington and Tehran, with US officials condemning repressive measures and Iranian leaders warning of external meddling in internal affairs. All right, Saul, I request you to join us back once again. Of course, the crackdown on the demonstrators and protesters is deadly, also has clearly spread to different parts of the world. Just yesterday, we saw the residence of Iranian ambassador in the United States also being, attacked, and I think it was ruined with some graffiti on it. Iran is a sovereign nation. Of course, it will not allow for a third-party intervention in its internal domestic affairs. How then do you think there can be a stop on this kind of bloody crackdown on demonstrators?
The Iranian regime will not stop cracking down on demonstrators as long as they keep demonstrating. There's no question. The people that have been arrested today, the so-called foreign nationals, are very unlikely to be actual foreign instigators in Iranian affairs, because the justice system there is so corrupt. It's essentially a Stasi operation. They're just as likely to be people that got on the wrong side of some IRGC official who have now been identified as these people. We know the IRGC are infiltrated in a ridiculous way by foreign intelligence. Hundreds, thousands perhaps, of people inside their organizations are currently working with foreign intelligence. So the foreign intelligence operation is not exactly what the IRGC are planning on doing. And I assure you, they know exactly how many people they have killed. And it's too many at this point for all those people back into the family of nations. So my guess is there will be no negotiations with them in the long run, and they will be gone. And as a result of this, they will lose their sovereignty at some point. Once you become the butchers of your own people, you might technically be sovereign. They came to power in a revolution 47 years ago this week. And my guess is that in the next couple of weeks or months, a different group will come to power by a revolution and get rid of them. And then they will become sovereign. So sovereignty changes, and sovereignty is dependent on the moral right to rule. And in the end, the people of Iran will have that say. And certainly other nations in the world looking in and looking on at what's going on also have a right to intervene if there are war crimes and crimes against humanity being committed. Sovereignty doesn't give you the impunity to do what you like with your own people. That's not what sovereignty is.
How is Israel watching this tension as of now? How prepared is really Israel? You're there in Tel Aviv to help us with some, ground reality there.
Oh, the life here is continuing as normal. I just came from the beach where there are people having their usual afternoon naps in the sun. And life is continuing as normal. People are flying in, flying out, continuing their lives, going to work. They know what to do if the Iranians decide to lash out against Israel in response to some American attack. They know where to go. They know where the shelters are. They get 10 to 15 minutes warning, and everyone knows exactly where they're supposed to be. And after last time in June, people take the Iranian rockets very seriously, because they're not like the Hamas or Hezbollah rockets. These rockets are the size of a bus, and they carry a ton of explosives and are big enough to demolish a building. And everyone has seen that with their own eyes. So after they saw the first Iranian rockets come down, people were much more careful about going to the shelters and staying there for the prescribed time. And I'm sure the same thing will happen. And Israel is ready. If you recall, last time the Iranians shot 550 missiles at Israel, in addition to perhaps 1,000 drones. And almost none of the drones got through, but 10% of those missiles did get through the air defenses. And those 50 missiles killed 29 people, 29 innocent civilians. That doesn't present any strategic risk to Israel, but it taught the people to be disciplined and careful about how they react to the sirens that will undoubtedly go off if Iran is attacked. And we can only hope for the best.
Indeed. Thanks, Saul, then for joining me and having this conversation with us. And we now move on, viewers. China's former Justice Minister Tang Yijun has been sentenced to life now in prison over taking bribes. Earlier in 2024, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection of China had accused Tang of helping family members secure financial deals and accepting lavish gifts and expenses. He was accused of violating the Communist Party's code of conduct and was consequently expelled from the party. Tang allegedly sought to benefit others in personnel appointments by accepting bribes, used his position to help family members secure business contracts, and intervened in market activities and judicial matters. All right, joining me now is Dr. Satoru Nagao. He's fellow at the Hudson Institute of Tokyo. Dr. Nagao, thanks very much for joining us. Firstly, it's surprising that China, with all its authoritarianism, with its closed economy, closed markets, closed society, it doesn't allow any external intervention in its country, and such activities have been going on in China. There are accusations of corruptions on several leaders close to Xi Jinping himself. So how have these activities been going on without really being noticed?
In this case, Xi Jinping's campaign against corruption is really going in some sectors. That is true. So he is strongly emphasizes from the tiger to fly. Tiger is a high rank official, and fly is a low rank official. So both, in case of the boss, he tries to crack down, and many people Xi Jinping has already arrested. The problem of this kind of the campaign, you have already mentioned, is this workable for Chinese system, but indeed there are two more problems. First one is the transparency. Because of the lack of transparency of the judiciary system, like judge, so other countries, this kind of information has published, but in China, not published. So that's why it is very difficult to confirm whether the official statement is true or not. So, and another problem is, indeed, because of the lack of transparency, there is a possibility that Xi Jinping is using this anti-corruption campaign to increase his own personal power to govern China. So that's why without a lack of the more proper system, even if Xi Jinping say this is anti-corruption campaign, still credibility was simply says people cannot trust what really happened.
What do you have to say about the quantum of punishment the former Justice Minister has been handed over a life sentence for these allegations of corruption?
It is very difficult to identify, but recently people who face this anti-corruption campaign is becoming higher rank. So in the past, one lower rank official or local officials, they arrested, but recently very high rank, very close to Xi Jinping is also arrested. So that's why there are two types of the analysis exist. One analysis is that this is a process to increase Xi Jinping's personal power to control China. But another one is this is really anti-corruption campaign, and because of the lack of the officials, Xi Jinping is facing the crisis to govern China because lack of the responsible and capable officials. So which one is right? Maybe we will see in the future. But related with the Taiwan crisis, which is Xi Jinping will order to invade Taiwan or blockade Taiwan, in this case, which part is better, concentrate their personal power to the Xi Jinping, or a little bit diversify the power? It is clear that Xi Jinping control everything is more better to move the Chinese military forces. So that's why in front of the 2027, which is the year the people expect China's invasion to Taiwan, that kind of the anti-corruption campaign could be the useful tool for Xi Jinping to increase their power to invade Taiwan.
Sure, Dr. Nagao, thanks then very much for joining me and helping us with your perspective. And we now move on, viewers, to some more news. Now, China has criticized the Grammy Award granted to the Dalai Lama, calling it a political tool aimed at Beijing. A Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson said the 14th Dalai Lama is not purely a religious leader, but a political exile involved in anti-China activities under the guise of religion. Let's listen in.
众所周知，14世达赖并不是单纯的宗教人士，而是一个披着宗教外衣、从事反华分裂活动的政治流亡者。我们坚决反对有关方面将艺术评奖作为反华政治操弄的工具，这一立场是一贯的、明确的。
The 90-year-old Buddhist leader won a Grammy in the audiobook narration category for Mediations, the Reflections of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. China has long claimed Tibet as part of its territory, while the Dalai Lama asserts Tibet was independent before Chinese troops entered in 1951. Alright, and we now move on. Now, United Arab Emirates linked investment firm acquired nearly half of the Trump family's cryptocurrency company, World Liberty Financial, purchasing a 49% stake just 4 days before President Trump's second inauguration. The Wall Street Journal reported the deal signed by Eric Trump has raised questions about potential conflicts of interest, although White House spokesperson and company representatives insist that neither the president nor his top envoy Steve Witkoff participated in the transaction. The agreement also placed 2 Emirati-backed executives on the company's board, allegedly after pressure on advanced artificial intelligence chip access, claims denied by the company. Democrats and former officials have called for congressional scrutiny, while Trump supporters argue the deal was transparent and business-driven, not politically motivated. The transaction is considered unprecedented, involving a foreign government-linked investor taking a significant stake in a company tied to a sitting president. And that's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Sima Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. US President Donald Trump has said he hopes to reach a deal with Iran despite warnings from the country's supreme leader that any US attack would spark a wider regional war. US President Donald Trump has said he believes Washington can reach a deal with Cuba even as his administration ramps up pressure through tariffs and oil supply restrictions targeting the island's allies. A Russian drone has hit a bus of Ukrainian miners, killing 12 and struck a maternity hospital, injuring patients as attacks resumed, amid fragile peace talks and a disputed pause on energy strikes. A 5-year-old boy and his father have returned to Minnesota after being released from ICE detention in Texas, drawing a community welcome as local officials voiced concerns over continued immigration enforcement in the area. Egypt's president and Jordan's king have reaffirmed opposition to displacing Palestinians as Israel said the Rafah crossing with Egypt would partially reopen on Monday to allow limited movement of people from Gaza. President Felix Tshisekedi has reaffirmed his call for inclusive national dialogue but set strict conditions as fighting continues in eastern DR Congo against M23 rebels, stressing that any talks must take place inside of the country under institutional control and must not challenge his electoral legitimacy or court rulings. According to statements published by the UNICEF and the Republic of Finland have announced 2.7 million euros in funding to support Syrian children through inclusive education, child protection, and social protection services, targeting the most vulnerable, including children with disabilities and those affected by conflict and displacement. According to IMF Managing Director Kristalina Georgieva, speaking at the annual Arab Fiscal Forum in Dubai, has said she has emphasized global inflation is projected to fall to 3.8% this year and 3.4% by 2027, driven by softer demand and lower energy prices, while stressing that trade integration remains crucial as global trade continues to slowly but steadily grow. Now we start with Middle East. According to recent reports, Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar are working to arrange a meeting between U.S. presidential envoy Steve Witkoff and senior Iranian officials in Ankara, Turkey. The meeting is expected to take place later this week as these countries hope that direct talks between the U.S. and Iran could help prevent a potential war in the region. Reportedly, a U.S. official has confirmed that these discussions are progressing and that the meeting could take place next week. The Trump administration has also reportedly indicated through multiple channels that it is open to negotiations with Iran, while President Donald Trump previously expressed hope for a fair and equitable deal with Tehran, emphasizing the U.S. stance on the complete renunciation of nuclear weapons. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor Gunratna, for joining us. Good to see you. Now, looking at this, how are we? So, what is the situation now that we know the reports coming in from both sides that they are open to talks, while both of them know that there are some sticking points that both of them are not backing down as of right now, one of them being, of course, the nuclear ambitions of Iran, which U.S. strongly accuses Iran of making nuclear weapons, while Iran denies that.
Asuma, as you indicated, the United States and Iran will go for talks in Turkey next week. Qatar, Egypt, and Turkey has played a very important role to receive President Trump's envoy Witkoff, and he will meet with senior Iranian leaders to discuss how to move forward as the United States is slowly and steadily closing in on Iran. US has built a huge military capability, unprecedented military capability that could strike Iran at any moment, at any time. And of course, the Iranian leader Ayatollah Khamenei has said that Iran will respond not only by striking the US, but striking the other countries in the Middle East. As you know, most of the countries in the Gulf are with the United States, and they are very concerned of escalation in tensions that will lead to a war in the Middle East. Iran, of course, is not keen to give up its nuclear program. Iran has repeatedly, I repeat, repeatedly lied to the international community that it is not manufacturing military-grade nuclear weapon. And what it has done is it has enriched uranium to a point that is not needed for a civilian nuclear program. So certainly Iran doesn't want to give up its production of its nuclear fissile material for the purpose of building a fully functional nuclear weapon. Second is Iran has suffered very significantly in the Israel-Iran war, US-Iran war last year, where many of its nuclear capability sites have been dismantled or disrupted. Iran also suffered, took many hits where its missile program, what you call the ballistic missile program, was disrupted. Iran has tried to restore that capability. So I believe that Iran doesn't want these two capabilities to be built by the United States or by the International Atomic Energy Agency. US is asking for intrusive inspection of the nuclear sites. So this is where it stands.
Right, and you know, in the first term of President Trump, he's the one who pulled out of the nuclear limiting pact with Iran, right? So do you think that he was then underestimating Iran's capabilities? And right now, why is Iran so emboldened, even though it seems to me that Iran is cornered, yet very confident, asking US to talk or negotiate on equal level or eye to eye?
You're very correct, Asuma. In fact, the Israelis provided very crucial intelligence to the United States that Iran was lying, that it has abandoned its nuclear program while it was enriching uranium. And in fact, there was a Mossad officer called Yossi Cohen, extraordinary, brilliant man, who was able to gain access to the Iranian nuclear archive. And the Israelis demonstrated to the United States that Iran was in fact telling the world that it was not manufacturing nuclear weapons, but was exactly doing that. Trump is fully aware of that. And of course, if there is no intrusive inspection, meaning International Atomic Energy Agency inspectors going into Iran and inspecting their nuclear sites, then of course the United States will strike. This time Iran has no escape. Iran cannot lie and continue to lie, because the Western governments, especially the United States and of course Israel, is fully aware of what Iran is saying and what Iran is really doing. And I personally believe that it is time for the Ayatollahs that came to power in 1979 to retire, because Iran has been destroyed as a nation. So many civilians have been killed. So many terrorist groups have been armed by Iran. So many groups have conducted attacks at the behest of Iran, such as the Lebanese Hezbollah, such as Ansarullah of the Houthi movement in Yemen, and of course that brutal attack by Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Palestinian Mujahideen Brigade. All these groups staged those attacks because they were trained, armed, financed, and directed by Iran. So Iranian regime should be reoriented for there to be permanent peace in the Middle East.
With that, I'd like to thank Professor Gunratna for sharing that insight. Please stay with us. Now we move on to our next news. Deputy Chairman of Russia's Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, has dismissed Western warnings of a Russia or Chinese threat to Greenland, calling them fabricated horror stories. Speaking in an interview at his residence outside of Moscow, Medvedev has said such claims were being used by Western leaders to justify their own actions. However, he has warned that the issue poses a serious challenge to unity within the NATO's alliance. Meanwhile, Medvedev has suggested that a calmer outcome is still possible before any military intervention or internal conflict within NATO. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Rohan Gunratna. He's joining us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now looking at the threats by Russian Security Council, Medvedev calling these threats fabricated horror stories, like they claim everything to be Russophobic. Is it really? What's your analysis on this?
Asuma, currently the polar caps are melting and the Arctic maritime route will become more viable, and even the Chinese will start to ship goods and supplies to Europe through the Arctic. And that is why Trump is interested in Greenland, because from the Greenland, Trump can always gain access to the Arctic. Of course, it may not be during Trump's period, but certainly the United States can gain access to the oil, gas, and the fish in the Arctic region. And that is a very rich region. And one has to understand that Trump wants to enhance US dominance of the Western Hemisphere. Trump also wants to empower and encourage the European allies not to spend only 1% of their GDP on defense, but to build very significant defense capabilities in preparation to bolster Western capabilities against Russia and China. But I personally do not think Russia and China will pose such a significant threat unless, of course, NATO builds capabilities along the European side of the Russian border. So what is important is for the Europeans not to provoke the Chinese and not to invite expansion of Russian operations in Ukraine to other European countries, but to peacefully settle this and to ensure that there is peace between Russia and the West, and of course between China and the West.
With that, I would like to thank Professor Gunratna for sharing that insight with us on NewsX World. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, moving on to India, India's Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has unveiled her national budget focusing on high-speed train projects and major technology investments. The government will support data centers, artificial intelligence, and the mining and processing of rare earth minerals. Sitharaman has told Parliament that these initiatives aim to drive a developed India while ensuring inclusive growth. The budget signals a push for modern infrastructure and technological advancement to strengthen India's global competitiveness. Let's listen into what the Indian Finance Minister has shared.
Today, we face an external environment in which trade and multilateralism are impaired and access to resources and supply chains are disrupted. New technologies are transforming production systems while sharply increasing demands on water, energy, and critical minerals. India will continue to take confident steps towards Vikasit Bharat, balancing ambition with inclusion. We now propose to support the mineral-rich states of Odisha, Kerala, Andhra Pradesh, and Tamil Nadu to establish dedicated rare earth corridors to promote mining, processing, research, and manufacturing. Attracting global business and investment, recognizing the need to enable critical infrastructure and boost investment in data centers, I propose to provide tax holiday till 2047 to any foreign company that provides cloud services to customers globally by using data center services from India.
Now for this, we welcome Dr. AJ Dua. He's a former Secretary of Commerce and Senior Economist, joins us live from Singapore. Thank you very much, Dr. AJ, for joining us. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, from this year, what is your biggest budget takeaways, and has India set the stage to strengthen India to deal with Trump's trade war?
As you heard the Finance Minister of India highlight some of the new emphasis which she intends giving in next year's budget. For us, the budget starts on 1st of April, though the presentation is done 2 months prior to it on the 1st of February. The emphasis in this year's budget, while continuing almost everything that was in the offing, which had been provided budgetary support, continuing with those kind of activities, the Finance Minister has done two things very clearly. One, she's increased the capital expenditure which would be incurred by the government, federal government, by about 10% from last year's about 10.56 the $100,000 to that's in terms of billions, and it comes to by 10% to 12.1 this year. And while doing that, she's continued the emphasis on the least risk-prone sectors. That means construction of highways as well as rail corridors. 7 or 8 rail corridors have been identified where high-speed rail, it may not be the Shinkansen type of speeds of 350, 360 kilometers, but they will certainly be in the range of range to facilitate faster commutation. Second, she has increased the defense expenditure by about 15%, considering that we are still in a state of war with our western neighbor, Pakistan, with which we had a 4-day conflict, which cost both the sides heavily in terms of equipment, in terms of manpower, armed forces, soldiers, etc. But what is more important is that she has chosen the 7 sectors of the economy which need to be pushed by the government, and one of these is the semiconductor sector, semiconductor mission as she calls it, for which she has provided 40,000 crores. So that means 400 billion rupees.
Thank you very much for sharing that insight, Dr. AJ. Now we move on to our next news. Walkers ventured onto the rarely seen frozen sea along Poland's coast as extreme cold gripped the country. The Bay of Gdansk in the southern Baltic began freezing in recent days due to prolonged sub-zero temperatures this weekend. Poland is experiencing its coldest temperatures yet, with parts of the country reaching minus 22 degrees. The freezing conditions have drawn both concern and curiosity as this unusual natural event continues to unfold. Now we move on to Grammy Awards. At the 2026 Grammy Awards, Kendrick Lamar and SZA's collaboration, Luther took home the prestigious Record of the Year trophy. The song triumphed over a strong field of nominees, including Lady Gaga's Abracadabra, Bad Bunny's DTMF, Billie Eilish's Wildflower, and Bruno Mars's and Rose's APT. During the ceremony, Recording Academy CEO Harvey Mason Jr. gave an emotional speech highlighting the power of music during uncertain times. Cher presented the 2026 Lifetime Achievement Award and humorously flubbed the announcement, naming Luther Vandross instead of Luther. While not the winner, the song was indeed inspired by the legendary R&B artist, sampling Vandross and Cheryl Lynn's 1982 rendition of If This World Were Mine. Along with Lamar and SZA, the win was shared by the producers and engineers behind the song, including Jack Antonoff, Scott Bridgway, and Sunwave and Kamasi Washington, among others. Luther has since become a chart-topping hit, spending 13 weeks at #1 on the Billboard Hot 100. Now we move on to Pakistan. Pakistani security forces have killed 145 militants in a 40-hour operation in Balochistan, officials say, following coordinated attacks by Baloch separatists that left 33 people dead, including civilians and security personnel. The raids targeted the outlawed Baloch Liberation Army, which Pakistan accuses of being Indian-backed, though India and Afghanistan both deny such claims. The attacks erupted in Quetta and Gwadar, with terrorists killing women and children and attempting to seize hostages. Authorities say Afghan soil was used as a base, despite pledges by the Taliban not to harbor militants. The BLA has repeatedly targeted Pakistani forces, civilians, and Chinese infrastructure projects in the resource-rich province. Officials praised the military, police, and paramilitary forces for swiftly repelling the assaults, while investigations continue across the region. Now we move on to Middle East. Doctors Without Borders, also known as MSF, says Israel's decision to end its operations in Gaza is a pretext to block humanitarian aid. The medical charity has warned that the move forces organizations to choose between risking staff safety or halting critical care for people in desperate needs. Israel has announced it was terminating MSF's work after the group refused to provide a list of Palestinian staff as requested by authorities, while MSF has condemned the decision, calling it an obstruction to delivering essential medical services in the war-torn territory. Now we move on to Grammy. U.S. President Donald Trump has criticized the 2026 Grammy Awards as virtually unwatchable and called host Trevor Noah a total loser. Trump has disputed claims made by Noah about him visiting Jeffrey Epstein's private island, calling the statement false and defamatory. He has said he has never been there and denied any previous allegations. While the U.S. president has threatened legal action against Noah, saying he plans to sue for plenty of dollars, Trump has also compared Noah unfavorably to Jimmy Kimmel and criticized CBS for airing the ceremony. He has framed his comments as a warning to Noah to get his facts straight, vying to take action if necessary. That's all we have time for. Keep watching NewsX World for more news updates from around the world.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
And the opportunity.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching The World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Russia confirms talks with Ukraine and the United States will now take place on Wednesday and Thursday in Abu Dhabi. The Kremlin says the shift is due to rescheduling coordination between the three sides. Iran denies receiving any ultimatum from President Trump on negotiations. Tehran summons EU ambassadors after the bloc labels the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist group. Israel says the Rafah crossing will open today for limited medical transfers from Gaza. Only 150 people a day are allowed to exit, with 50 permitted to enter from Egypt. Drones target the airport in northeastern Kisangani in Democratic Republic of Congo. Local authorities say 8 drones are neutralized and no casualties are reported. China sentences former Justice Minister Tang Yijun to life in prison for bribery. The ruling is part of Beijing's broad anti-corruption drive. Right-wing candidate Laura Fernandez wins Costa Rica's presidential election in a landslide. She secures a first-round victory after pledging a hard crackdown on violence linked to drug trafficking. Former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, resigns from the Labour Party. The move follows fresh reports about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Bad Bunny uses his Grammy acceptance speech to denounce US immigration raids. The Puerto Rican star tells the crowd migrants are human and American too. Those are the headlines this hour. We move to our top story, and the Kremlin has confirmed that the next round of Russia-US-Ukraine security talks will take place in Abu Dhabi on the 4th and 5th of this month. The Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov said that Russia and Ukraine have narrowed their differences on some issues, though more complex matters remain unresolved. Though he stressed that the Kremlin will not provide details on the last round of talks between Russian Special Envoy Kirill Dmitriev and US officials. These meetings are part of the ongoing effort to find a diplomatic path forward. Moscow says it continues to coordinate closely with Washington and Kyiv, aiming to address key security concerns. Joining us to discuss this situation upcoming in Abu Dhabi is Gilbert Doctorow, an international affairs expert, joining us live from Brussels. Gilbert, thank you very much for joining us. It's always a pleasure. Of course, these talks are much anticipated. Later on this week, the 4th and the 5th of the month, we'll see the second round of trilateral talks between the US, Russia and Ukraine. Some ironed out differences reported between the Russia and Ukrainian side. What are those things that have been ironed out, and what is very much going to be front and center to these talks in the UAE capital?
I think that we have to admit that the efforts by the United States and by Russia to keep their talks secret behind closed doors without any leaks, by using, instead of the normal diplomatic channels, the personal envoys of President Putin, Mr. Dmitriev in particular, and Mr. Witkoff for President Trump, without leaks. Now, that is to say that none of us, and absolutely none of us, know with any certainty what is going on. But let me share with your audience what could be going on. And it has very little to do with the Russia-Ukraine situation, though it would explain the postponement of the talks from what it should have been yesterday, Sunday, to what is now said to be Wednesday. I have in mind Iran. Mr. Trump has put enormous pressure on Iran and has threatened strikes, which could have taken place yesterday or today, but so far have not. At the same time, Mr. Trump appears to be backing away from the use of force and says that there's some discussions going on. Well, I believe the discussions are going on with the assistance and participation of the Russians. Let us look at what happened in the last several days. You had the head of security, the Security Council in Iran, visiting Moscow and speaking to President Putin in Moscow. The next day, you had Mr. Dmitriev going to Miami. This was described as a trip to continue the discussions of the working group on improving U.S.-Russian commercial ties, trade ties, and so forth. In the present situation, where the meeting of the tripartite meeting on Ukraine was postponed indefinitely, only we learned today that it's going to be on Wednesday, that was postponed, which means there was a kind of crisis in the relations between the United States and Russia. And the crisis is over Iran. And I think it is highly relevant to say that are you there?
Gilbert, apologies for the interruption. I want to focus on in these talks, of course, in Abu Dhabi coming up. Security guarantees, another issue which has reportedly been ironed out. Of course, the main issue here is going to be territory going into these talks on the 4th and the 5th. In terms of security guarantees, this document is supposedly 100% done. Zelensky says it's 100% done and is just waiting for President Donald Trump's signature. How much is that going to play, these so-called US security guarantees, into these talks and how Moscow is going to approach them?
I think if you missed the last several minutes of my remarks, then I have to come back to them, because there will be no security guarantees. There will be no agreement whatsoever. There will be no meetings between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine if another issue isn't solved. I'm saying that the weekend was a point of interruption of US-Russian relations over the United States' imminent attack on Iran, which did not take place. And when it did not take place, a date was given for the renewal of talks between the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. This is not an accident. These two things are directly connected. What we're talking about is Russia breaking off relations with the United States if the United States attacks Iran. That is what we're talking about. The head of the Iranian Security Council was in Moscow on Friday. On Saturday, Mr. Dmitriev went to Miami. He wasn't talking about what they said they would be talking about, the improvement of U.S.-Russian trade relations. That's utter nonsense. The point of breakage in U.S.-Russian relations was over Iran. And apparently they reached agreement on that. And what they may have agreed upon is that the Iranian enriched uranium will be shipped to China. That is what is possibly going on. So everything else that we are hearing coming out of Moscow, coming out of Washington, is disinformation, which is intended to keep you, me, and your audience uninformed.
Gilbert Doctorow, thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. It's always a pleasure to speak to you on these issues. We now move on to our next story. And the European Union has welcomed the reopening of the Rafah border crossing between Gaza and Egypt, calling it a vital lifeline for Palestinians. EU Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas described the move as a positive step in the broader peace plan for the region. She said the crossing will provide critical access for sick and wounded Palestinians in Gaza, and the EU has also deployed a civilian mission to monitor operations at the border and support Palestinian border guards. Officials hope the reopening will help ease humanitarian pressures and advance ongoing peace efforts in the region. Joining us now in this discussion is Ali Mohammed Abushbak. He is a Middle East researcher. He joins us live from Cairo. Thank you very much, Ali, for joining us. We know that they're going to let 150 people a day outside the Gaza Strip to seek that much needed medical help. What's your analysis on the way that the Israelis have opened the Rafah border crossing and what it means for the injured in Gaza and the people, of course, who want to come in to Gaza?
Thank you, Thomas, for having me. Things is today morning, Israel have announced that reopen the border. Since morning up to now, just only 5 patients and 5 injured people have been confirmed to cross the corridor from Gaza to Egypt, and accompany with them 2 people or 2 relatives for them. Since now, just only 5 out of 50 persons or patients from Gaza. According to Associated Press, they confirmed just only 50-50, because yesterday it was the news about 150 for the people, for the Palestinian who will leave Gaza, and 50 people from outside Gaza to in Gaza. Up to now, the confirmation, it's about just only 5 people, 5 patients or injured civilians. According to Palestinians health ministry, they have a list more than 450 they need immediately to leave to Gaza, because they are in serious injury and injured, and they are suffering from the shortage of the medicine in Gaza and the treatment from Gaza. Things is up to now the process, and according to Israel, it's a pilot operation to reopen the border in Gaza. And since up to now the process, it's not clear. It's faggy how Israel will continue this reopen the border, and up to now it's not clear how many people they will allow for them, Israel, because as I mentioned yesterday through your broadcast, Israel has a list for the name and confirm these people has qualify the security requirement from the Israeli side or no. So Israel has also the control of the border despite it's remotely. And about the surveillance of the border, Israel has several of equipment in the border, Egypt-Gaza border, to monitor the process. For the people who's coming from outside Gaza to into Gaza, it's up to now, it's not clear how many people Israel allow for them and how they are treating for them. But for the patient, this reopen, it's hope for them, because since 2 years, Israel have closed the border for both sides. This is the first time Israel reopened the border for both sides to who will come in or to go out Gaza, and several of civilians and patients. We are not talking about the people who are suffering from the war injury, because also several of patients in Gaza, cancer people in Gaza, they are suffer from the shortage of the medicine and the shortage of medical supplies in Gaza.
Ali, do stay with us as we move on to a related development. We will be joined by you once again. And meanwhile, Palestinians in Gaza welcomed the reopening of the Rafah crossing, hoping for more aid and access to medical treatment abroad. Israel reopened the border with Egypt for a limited number of people on foot, allowing some to leave Gaza and others to return. The crossing is the only route in or out for over 2 million residents and has been mostly closed during the war. Around 50 Palestinians are expected to enter and leave Gaza daily, facing strict Israeli security checks. Ali joins us once again. I want to focus on, of course, the much needed aid that's needed inside of the enclave. This, of course, comes a day after Doctors Without Borders, otherwise known as MSF, has been banned from operating inside Gaza, along with 37 other crucial aid agencies. despite this reopening, which of course is a huge positive, what challenges still remain, even despite the fact that the first stage of this ceasefire deal had in clear writing that Israel should allow the unrestricted flow of aid into the enclave?
Thomas, before 2005, before Israel withdrew from Gaza, Israel used to control that border. And after the Israel withdrew from Gaza, according to agreement between Palestinian Authority and Israel, should be Palestinian Authority taking the responsibility to operate this border, and also there is a representative from European Union. At that time, from 2005 up to 2009, the border, 2007, because Hamas took over Gaza after military coup in 2007. Since that time, open the border, it was a big challenge. They used to close more than reopen. They more than opened the border. So I'm not optimistic about reopening the border at this time, because we have a bad experience in 2005 up to 2007 when Hamas took over Gaza. Things is also about the Israeli surveillance in the border. So Israel has a checklist and allowing for whoever should be alive or should not taking a treatment and to die in Gaza by day. So the thing is, it's not up to now. It's not reopening the border. That's mean the all hope for the civilians from Gaza. There is more than 100,000 civilians outside Gaza. They flee the war in Gaza. They flee the Gaza during the war. They are await for rejoin their family or to reunite with their family. So this things is a big challenge. Also, I guess I'm not optimist, because most of the Israeli ministers, they are taking, reopen the border. It was under the American pressure, because of Donald Trump, he pressurized the Israeli minister to reopen the border. It's supposed to reopen during the October 2025, once Hamas and Israel reached to a ceasefire deal. But Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu used to buy the time, and he used to create a pretext to maintain this this issue. Things here also, Thomas. Netanyahu's policy, he wants to create a chaos in Gaza, inside the enclave. So if there is the people, it's not going to take the treatment. Most of the people still hanging in Gaza. Several of people who's outside are still hanging outside Gaza. This is a create a several of issue, especially we are talking about society issue, because since this is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza. It's not well solved by 1 year. If we are talking about 50 patients from Gaza to flee from outside Gaza, that's a very limited number. It's not it's not logistic. It's not here it's not giving a Palestinian a glimmer of hope. Just only the people and the chance to leave Gaza or to go back Gaza. It's a very limit for anyone. Here the things and the channels. Worth mentioning that Thomas, reopen the border is only for not a humanitarian aid or for a humanitarian crisis or issue. That is will not solve the miserable situation in Gaza. It will not solve this kind of issue in Gaza, because Israel still control the border of Kerem HaShalom or Kerem Salem in Gaza, which most of the humanitarian aid to flee to Gaza through that border. So this kind of reopen the border is just only for a personal civilians. That doesn't mean the humanitarian crisis in Gaza it will finish, or they were going to treat this humanitarian situation in Gaza. It's still, and also about reconstruct Gaza. I guess the second phase of the negotiation or the deal between Hamas and Israel. Today we are on through it. It's a huge challenge about demilitarize Hamas. That's make it more challenge, and that's make Israel control the life in Gaza. Israel, according to them,
Ali, apologies. I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Unfortunately, we have run out of time on this story, but thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. We'll of course bring you all updates coming out of the ongoing situation in Gaza as soon as we get them here on the channel. We now turn over to South Asia, and Pakistani security forces continue hunting separatist militants across southwestern Balochistan following coordinated attacks that killed nearly 50 people, including 17 security personnel and 31 civilians. The Baloch Liberation Army claimed responsibility for the strikes, named Operation Heroth or Black Storm, targeting schools, banks and security installations. Pakistan's military said it killed 177 BLA fighters in 3 days of fighting, with Interior Minister Mohsin Naqvi warning that Indian agents and their facilitators will be completely eliminated. India has denied the allegations, urging Pakistan to address long-standing domestic grievances. The attackers dressed as civilians and used human shields, highlighting the escalating security challenges in Pakistan's largest and poorest province. Joining us now is Major General Dr. S.B. Asthana, an international strategic and military analyst, joining us live from New Delhi. Thank you very much for taking the time here and speaking to us on this issue. How significant is the scale and coordination of this latest offensive by the Baloch Liberation Army compared to previous BLA operations?
See, this time BLA seems to be much more determined, and it seems that they are looking a step ahead. Also, they have coordinated with TTP, which is the other organization in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which also has got a problem with Pakistan military. Now, Pakistan military has been causing a lot of atrocities to Baluchis, and Baluchis are fighting for their survival, as well as taking revenge of people who have been missing or who have been abducted. So apparently this time the preparation seems to be much better. It is seems to be better coordinated, and the number of attacks and simultaneous attacks at different places, this indicates a higher level of preparation this time.
And Pakistan claims it kills 177 BLA fighters in 3 days. How credible are these numbers, and what does it say about the instability of the region?
See, I will keep these numbers under doubt for a simple reason, because Pakistan military, they are famous for firing randomly, and even those civilians who get killed, even the activists who get killed, they name them as militants. So number of people killed of 150 is not a surprise, certainly, but whether all of them are militants or otherwise, that's a question mark, and that question mark remains. And of course, you also get a different kind of confirmation from the Baluchi side, who say no, these people, many people have not been killed. At the same time, the figures which you will get from Pakistan military as to how much their casualties were, they will be much lower than the figures which you get from the Baluchis. So therefore, I'm sure the truth would lie somewhere in between. And as analysts, we put these figures almost, you can say, anything between 0 to the figures which they are quoting. It could be anything.
Okay, do stay with us, Dr. Asthana, as we move on over to our next story. And we head to the United States. And the US says it has begun talks with Cuba's leadership as President Donald Trump pushes for a deal days after threatening Cuba's fragile economy with what he described as a virtual oil blockade. Trump called Cuba a failing nation without Venezuela's support and said negotiations are underway, though he gave no details on what a deal might include. Washington's pressure has intensified since a U.S. operation ousted Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, cutting off a major source of oil for Havana and exacerbating fuel shortages. Trump signed orders threatening tariffs on countries that sell oil to Cuba, a move Havana says is aimed at suffocating its economy. Mexico says it plans to send humanitarian aid, including food and supplies, even as diplomatic efforts continue over oil shipments. Cuba has accused the US of economic coercion as fuel lines grow and power cuts deepen across the island. Joining us once again is Dr. Asthana to discuss this further. Why would the United States now announce that it's starting to talk to Cuba amid this maximum economic pressure as opposed to before?
This is typical Trump's way of handling everything by economic as well as by military coercion. Now, what he has done is that Cuba, as you rightly mentioned, was being supplied maximum oil by Venezuela. And if you cut out Venezuela oil, then Cuba gets starved for energy. At the same time, the other supplies also, once you have a blockade, obviously Cuba is a small island with much lesser military or military capability to resist the blockade of United States. So actually, it is a humanitarian crisis being caused by the economic coercion by President Trump. Now, when he says that I will sanction other countries who are going to help, that also again is a humanitarian issue. And that is why, if you, as you mentioned, if I have to analyze that, Mexicans have rightly called it as humanitarian aid, that they want to give humanitarian aid, because it is going to cause a humanitarian crisis in Cuba for sure, whether it is in terms of food, whether it is in terms of the energy and transportation. So I think the maximum pressure tactics of President Trump is basically to somehow put Cuba in a situation where they get subdued and do not support, because if you recall, Cuban military was supporting Venezuela and they had their footprints in Venezuela. So he is basically trying to punish Cuba for whatever has happened earlier. At the same time, Cuba had a very strong links with Russia at some point of time. If you recall, the Cuban crisis of 1962, that became a major crisis. But as of now, Russia is involved in Ukraine war. So United States feels that this is an opportune moment when they can press on Cuba without perhaps Russia acting that aggressively as it acted in 1962. Back to you.
Yes, Major General S.B. Asthana, thank you very much for taking the time in joining us here on NewsX World. It's a pleasure to have you. We now turn to East Asia for our last update, and Japan components manufacturer TDK has said that it is being affected by Chinese export restrictions on rare earths and is taking steps to diversify its procurement sources. China last month banned exports of dual-use items that can be used for military purposes to Japan, with the items including rare earths amid a diplomatic dispute. TDK Chief Financial Officer Tetsuju Yamanshini said that the procurement of the materials has reached an extremely difficult stage. Yamanshi has said that the company is developing technology to produce magnets without rare earths or using them as little as possible. While further speaking on this, Yamashi had said that the impact began last year, not in January, with the company maintaining production using stockpiled materials. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side.
Pakistan's insurgency stems from neglect. BLA escalates violence in Balochistan. Military force won't resolve Balok grievances. CPEC benefits, but Balok are excluded. Balochistan's peace needs political dialogue. Hello, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching another episode of Explained. Balochistan, Pakistan's largest and least populated province, has long been a focal point of insurgency, separatism and deep-rooted discontent. Today we break down the latest wave of violence that the region has seen. In the past 40 hours, the Balok Liberation Army, otherwise known as the BLA, has claimed responsibility for some of the deadliest attacks in years, killing more than 200 security personnel in one of the most coordinated offensives we've seen in recent times. Historically, Balochistan has been sporadic and seen sporadic uprisings and insurgent activity dating back to the early days of Pakistan's formation. What was once considered a low-intensity insurgency has grown into a more frequent and coordinated campaign, particularly in the last 2 years. In 2024, the BLA stormed army and navy bases, and in 2025, their operations included highway assaults and attacks on civilians. escalating tensions and leading to greater security crackdowns. In the recent January 2026 attacks, they are perhaps the most brazen example of this, as the group launched a 40-hour assault on over a dozen locations with bombings, gunfire and coordinated strikes. The rise in the scale and sophistication of these attacks is a clear indicator of the increasing capabilities of the BLA, which has been recruiting more actively, including the use of female suicide bombers, a tactic not seen in previous insurgencies. The roots of the Balok insurgency lie in a long history of economic marginalization, political neglect, and a deep sense of injustice. Despite being rich in natural resources, including gas, minerals, and access to the strategically vital Gwadar port, Balochistan remains one of Pakistan's most underdeveloped provinces. Many Balok people feel that their resources are being exploited by the Pakistani state and foreign interests, particularly China, under the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, otherwise known as CPEC. While the CPEC promises massive infrastructure investments, such as the development of the Gwadar port, local Balok people see little benefit from these projects. Instead, they feel excluded from the wealth generated by their province's natural resources, fueling resentment towards Islamabad and other foreign powers like China. Balochistan's coal mines, for example, are a case in point. Workers there face extreme danger in poorly maintained conditions, and separatist groups have often attacked these sites, killing workers from other provinces who are brought in for labour. These incidents are a direct consequence of the growing security vacuum in Balochistan, where insurgents are emboldened by a lack of state presence in remote areas. Despite numerous military operations, Pakistan's response to the Balok insurgency is largely focused on kinetic force, airstrikes, ground offensives and counter-insurgency tactics. However, these measures have failed to address the core grievances of the Balok population. The Pakistani state views the insurgents as terrorists, while many Balok people see them as freedom fighters struggling for autonomy and justice. The Pakistani government's continued focus on military solutions while neglecting the political, economic and social issues at the heart of the insurgency has led to the perpetuation of this violent cycle. One of the central factors in the escalation of violence has been the BLA's growing sophistication in its tactics. In addition to the frequent use of improvised explosive devices and bombings, the BLA has also employed female suicide bombers, as seen in the attack on Chinese nationals in Karachi. This represents a significant shift in strategy, as the group has become more organised, daring and willing to target both military and civilian infrastructure, including Chinese interests, which it accuses of furthering the exploitation of Balochistan's resources. This has brought the group into direct conflict, not only with the Pakistani state, but also foreign powers like China, further complicating the situation in the region. The death toll from the recent attacks serves as a tragic reminder of the human cost of this ongoing war. As the violence continues to escalate, civilians are often the collateral damage in a struggle for many that feels like a fight for survival. In the wake of these attacks, the Pakistani military launched extensive counter-offensives, killing over 140 BLA members, but the reality on the ground is far more complicated. The attacks on civilians, particularly those from other provinces, reflect a significant escalation in the insurgency's tactics. These attacks showcase the deepening divide between the Balok people and the Pakistani state, with the insurgents gaining more local support due to the widespread sense of disenfranchisement. At the heart of this conflict lies a fundamental question: can military power alone resolve the grievances of Balochistan's people? The answer, as history has shown, is no. Military victories might push back insurgents temporarily, but they do not address the systemic issues that fuel the rebellion. Balochistan's economic underdevelopment, corruption and political exclusion have created a volatile environment where insurgency can thrive. Until the Pakistani government addresses these root causes, including better resource distribution, political representation and investment in local infrastructure and services, the cycle of violence will continue. In the broader geopolitical context, Balochistan's strategic importance cannot be overstated. It is a vital link in China's Belt and Road Initiative, and its proximity to Iran and Afghanistan makes it a significant point of interest for regional and global powers. Pakistan finds itself caught between internal pressures from Baloch separatists and external forces such as China and India, each with their own interests in the region. The challenge for Islamabad is to navigate these complex external relations while addressing the internal fissures that have long plagued the province. Without a genuine political solution that includes the voices of the Baloch people, the region will remain a flashpoint for both local and international conflict. Ultimately, the violence in Balochistan is a stark reminder of the importance of political inclusion, economic justice and regional diplomacy. The BLA's insurgency is not just about separatism, it's about a people who feel neglected, marginalised and ignored. The future of Balochistan depends on whether Pakistan can break the cycle of violence by addressing the legitimate grievances of its people, offering economic inclusion and engaging in meaningful political dialogue. Without these steps, the conflict will only continue to escalate with no end in sight. Well, that's all for this episode of Explained. Stay tuned as we bring you more in-depth insights and stories that matter.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome to Deep Dive on NewsX World. I'm Thomas Porteous. Now, a story that should not die. The Epstein files. Millions of pages, powerful names, global political aftershocks, and a question that still haunts the world. Who was protected and who is not? The latest release includes emails, flight logs, letters and documents showing Jeffrey Epstein's ties to politicians, business leaders, tech figures and royalty. Many after his first conviction in 2008. The context is explosive because the documents show Epstein as an active contact even after he was convicted. Let's take it person by person and break down the controversies as reported. Now, let's start in the UK. Andrew Windsor Mountbatten. The files show his name on hundreds of times. The documents include emails suggesting Epstein offered to introduce Andrew to a 26-year-old Russian woman. There's an invitation for Epstein to dine at Buckingham Palace and a mention of contact long after Epstein's 2008 sex crimes conviction. Andrew has always denied any wrongdoing, but these files have intensified pressure from UK officials to cooperate with investigators. Now moving on, the richest man in the world, Elon Musk. The files show a handful of emails between Musk and Epstein about travel and social events, including mentions of Epstein's private island. One email suggests Musk asked, "What day/night will be the wildest party on your island?" in the year of 2012. Musk, however, has denied ever visiting the island, flying on Epstein's jet or attending his events. He says the emails are misinterpreted and being used to damage his reputation. Our former president, Bill Clinton. The files show the president traveling on Epstein's private jet and meeting him at the White House. Clinton's team says he ended ties with Epstein after his first criminal charges in 2006. No victims have publicly accused Clinton of any sexual crimes, but the sight of his name in this release is incendiary. Crown Princess Mette-Marit of Norway appears. The Epstein files reveal extensive contact with Jeffrey Epstein long after his 2008 conviction. Her name appears in emails and documents from 2011 to 14, including personal and flirtatious messages. Files show she stayed at Epstein's Palm Beach home for several days in 2013. The Norwegian Prime Minister has acknowledged her poor judgment. The Royal Palace says she regrets the contact, but critics warn it damages the monarchy's image. And now the most controversial name on the files, President Donald Trump. The latest Epstein files have plunged President Trump into controversy. The documents include an FBI tip sheet with unverified allegations from the public. One claims a girl aged 13 or 14 was sexually assaulted in New Jersey and also abused by Epstein. The FBI contacted the caller, but no outcome is recorded. Other tips allege sex trafficking at a Trump golf property in California in the mid-1990s. The FBI deemed the complaint not credible, however. Additional extreme claims include Trump being complicit in the death of a newborn child. There is no evidence and no charges pressed, however. Several tips also reference Mar-a-Lago events. Many claims could not be verified or were not pursued. Trump did say he cut ties with Epstein long before his arrest and denies any wrongdoing. The DOJ cautions the files include unverified and potentially false material, some submitted before the 2020 election and never substantiated. Beyond these big names, the files list about 150 people with varied degrees of connection. In some cases, they're associates, in others, social contacts, but not all indicate illegal activity. Survivors of Epstein's abuse have called for the latest release of the files a failure of justice. They say the men who abused them remain hidden and protected even now. In a moment of truth, these files show not just connections, they show power close to the edge of reputation, law and privilege. And they force us to ask, when the world's most powerful are named in a scandal like this, who pays the price? Joining us now is Alison Mutler, the former Associated Press Bureau Chief in Romania. She joins us live from the capital now, Bucharest. Thank you very much, Alison, for joining us. Of course, let's start in the UK after these files have been released. Andrew Mountbatten-Windsor, of course, formerly Prince Andrew, and the Norwegian princess have been named in these files. What do you think that reveals about the privilege and oversight in these monarchies in Europe?
First of all, we have to say quite fairly, they are targets for people as debauched and criminal as Jeffrey Epstein. He sought out their company because it would give him, an allure of respectability, of privilege himself. He thought attaching himself to the royal families would shield him. And we learned that that is true because Andrew Windsor Mountbatten, former Prince Andrew, was apparently left alone because it was a very sensitive issue, I understand, by the British intelligence services. And why has it taken so long for the Crown Princess of Norway's name to come out? So I think Jeffrey Epstein targeted these people, first of all, to give himself some sort of social, very high level, that what he craved. He was just an ordinary guy at the end of the day. He wasn't nobility or aristocracy. But also he thought if he associated with that level of social sort of level of social class, the British and the Norwegian aristocracy, it would actually protect him, which it appears to have done. But the problem is now he's dead. He killed himself, as far as we know. And now we have these two, particularly in the case of Prince Andrew, he's been thoroughly disgraced. He's had to move out of his home. He's lost his name. He's lost his title. And now the Norwegian Crown Princess comes out. So they are now having to deal with what they tried to hide for so many years. And I'm sure there'll be a scandal in Norway. I think Norwegians will not accept this, and they will think it's absolutely disgraceful that their crown princess had exchanged flirtatious messages with him, and also benefited. She got to stay on one of his properties in the Caribbean. So the fallout is continuing, is affecting these two royals, and that's the only two we know about so far, long after his death. But it's clear also these two cases we're talking about, the former Prince Andrew and the Crown Princess of Norway, did have poor judgment, because obviously they are a target for people as criminal and debauched as someone like Jeffrey Epstein, but they are supposed to have better judgment, and they didn't, and now they're paying for it.
And US President Donald Trump is arguably the president of the most powerful nation on earth. How do allegations in the Epstein files challenge Trump's credibility and America's moral authority on global justice?
Interesting question, because had this been 10, 15 years ago, I think it would have been even worse. I mean, these are appalling. Of course, they've damaged his reputation, but his reputation has never been that good, particularly as far as women are concerned, and perhaps, illegal or legally great business deals. So obviously it doesn't help Donald Trump, and it's absolutely appalling that America, which still sees itself as the leader of the most powerful free nation on the earth, to be embroiled in such a debauched and illegal scandal. But that said, standards have really gone down in the last 10, 15 years. So it's not as shocking. It's a terrible thing to say, but it's not as shocking as it would have been, say, 10, 15 years ago, say, under Obama. But it is. Obviously, it's another headache for Donald Trump. He's desperately tried to prevent all this information, all this scurrilous details, debauched details coming out, but he hasn't managed. Again, of course, there are questions. Was there legal wrongdoing? Did that happen? And he's denied that. But these are also like damage people's social and political reputation. It's not necessarily about legality, because obviously being associated with a sex offender of the global level that Jeffrey Epstein was is about the worst thing that can happen to somebody's reputation who is in the public domain.
Of course, and in the global context, these revelations expose the ways wealth and power can manipulate political, legal and social systems. How do we navigate through this?
Well, I think it's an expose of the modern age. We show how people who perhaps publicly are opposed to each other, who are rivals, and people, but what ties them together is their privilege. They are rich, they are powerful, they're influential people, and we see people, in the intelligence domain. Jeffrey Epstein contacted, I understand, Israeli and British intelligence to get to access Gaddafi's frozen funds. So you see this kind of web at the highest global levels between politicians, business people, entrepreneurs, and royalty as well. And it's frankly shocking. It's what many people have suspected but never been able to prove. But this is a case for the modern age that lays it out bare, that this is exactly what happens or can happen behind the scenes. And these are people, if you look at Bill Clinton, you look at Donald Trump, you look at the former Prince Andrew, you look at Peter Mandelson, for example, you look at the Israeli Prime Minister whose name appeared last year. These are people who thought they could act with impunity and that they were beyond public scrutiny and they were beyond legal judgment. Whether there will be some legal recourse is another question, but they have been totally socially and publicly disgraced by their connection to Jeffrey Epstein.
Alison Mutler, thank you so much for joining us. It's always a great pleasure to talk to you on these issues.
Thank you, Thomas. Okay.
Well, that's all for this episode of Deep Dive. Stay tuned on NewsX World for more international news updates. Thank you.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform.
Hello and welcome, I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top headlines this hour. Russia confirms talks with Ukraine and the United States will now take place on Wednesday and Thursday in Abu Dhabi. The Kremlin says the shift is due to scheduling coordination between the three sides. Iran denies receiving any ultimatum from President Trump on negotiations. Meanwhile, Tehran summons EU ambassadors after the bloc labels the Revolutionary Guard a terrorist group. Israel says the Rafah crossing will open today for limited medical transfers from Gaza. Only 150 people a day are allowed to exit, with 50 permitted to enter from Egypt. Drones target the airport in northeastern Kisa Anjani in DRC. Local authorities say 8 drones are neutralized and no casualties are reported. China sentences former Justice Minister Tang Yijun to life in prison for bribery. The ruling is part of Beijing's broad anti-corruption drive. Right-wing candidate Laura Fernandez wins Costa Rica's presidential election in a landslide. She secures a first-round victory after pledging a hard crackdown on violence linked to drug trafficking. Former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, resigns from the Labour Party. The move follows fresh reports about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Bad Bunny uses his Grammy acceptance speech to denounce US immigration raids. The Puerto Rican star tells the crowd migrants are human and American. We start this hour in West Asia, and Iran is finalizing steps ahead of upcoming nuclear talks with the United States. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson Esmail Bakay says they are reviewing and finalizing each phase of the diplomatic process. He emphasized the importance of the method and working environment for the talks, which are expected to conclude very soon. Bakay also addressed regional concerns, stating that countries in the region are trying to play a positive role, unlike European nations, which he believes are escalating tensions. Iran hopes to wrap up the negotiations in the coming days, focusing on key diplomatic details. Let's listen in.
در رابطه با اینکه ساختارها به چه شکل خواهد بود، خب در این مرحله ما مشغول بررسی‌های مختلف هستیم. جنبه‌های مختلف موضوع رو باید بررسی بکنیم. کشورهای منطقه که خب هم دغدغه‌مند هستن نسبت به وضعیت جاری در منطقه و هم صادقانه تلاش می‌کنند برای ایفای نقش مثبت برخلاف کشورهای اروپایی که کاملا در جهت تشدید تنش دارن اقدام میکنند واسطه پیام هستند. در این مرحله ما در حال بررسی و تصمیم گیری در مورد جزئیات هر روند دیپلماتیکی هستیم که امیدواریم طی روزهای آینده به نتیجه برسه. در مورد عرض میکنم نحوه انجام کار و اون چارچوبی که شما اشاره کردید به توییت دبیر محترم شورای عالی امنیت ملی.
Joining us now is Mohammed Osman, a Middle East affairs expert, joining us live from Cairo. Mohammed, as always, it's a great pleasure to get your insight on this. Of course, we've seen a diplomatic round of negotiations when it comes to Iran's nuclear deal occur before the 12-day war with Israel. Those failed. Israel, of course, struck Iran in a surprise attack, and it led to the United States striking 3 nuclear sites inside Iran. Now that these protests have scaled down, but of course we saw the deaths of many civilians, where does that put Iran and the United States on the diplomatic footing now?
Thank you for having me, Thomas. Always a pleasure to be with you. To begin with, this was never about the protesters and never about the protests. I don't think that the United States or the West or Israel really care about democracy in Iran or about the building of a new government in Iran that is more inclusive, that is less repressive, that is more secular. I don't think anyone cares about that. What the American really is how Iran is posing a challenge to its dominance in the region, to Israel's regional hegemony. The United States seeks to create a new regional order in the region, a regional system that will be led by Israel, a structure with Israel on top. And one of the main obstacles before that is the Iranian regime, love it or hate it. These are certain realities on the ground. And the United States even though they are not really involved or invested in the idea of regime change in Iran, however, they do believe that the nuclear threat is real, that Iran's missile capabilities are a subject of dire concern, and also Iran's role in supporting its proxies, militias and terrorist organizations and resistant groups around the region is something, of course, that harms U.S. interests and threatens Israel, the U.S.'s prime ally in the region as well. So this is what the U.S. cares about. Whether they can achieve this militarily or through diplomacy, this is what they care about. And I think this is why we see the encouraging signs very cautiously, of course. We view this at this point. I wouldn't say I'm really optimistic, but I do say that it is a positive sign that negotiations are being taken more seriously at this point. President Pezeshkian of Iran has instructed the foreign minister to prepare for negotiations. 3 countries have played a role in facilitating this diplomatic thaw of some sort. That is, of course, Turkey, Egypt, and Qatar. They played the central role in facilitating indirect conversations between the Iranians and the Americans in order to find grounds for talks at this point. However, on the other hand, we have Israel now, who is very eager to derail and spoil the entire negotiating process. And you know what, Thomas? Probably they might succeed. So I do not believe that the prospects of escalation have diminished. I believe that so far, given the current variables, the military escalation is not an eventuality or inevitable. However, it is highly, highly probable given the current circumstances, unless diplomacy progresses forward to some meaningful arrangements that they can both discuss and reach together.
Okay, Mohammed, do stay with us as we turn to our next story. And the French Foreign Minister, Jean-Noël Barrot, has warned Iran that it must agree to major concessions and a drastic shift in its stance to avoid military strikes from the United States. Barrot emphasized that the US is prepared to strike, but has offered Iran a chance for negotiations. Let's listen in to his comments.
Les États-Unis se sont mis en situation de frapper l'Iran. Ils ont proposé à l'Iran des négociations dont l'Iran doit impérativement se saisir, consentir à des concessions majeures et à un changement radical de posture.
Okay, we now turn on to our next story. And Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the Russian forces have intensified attacks on Ukraine's logistics infrastructure over 24 hours, with railway facilities emerging as the primary target. The renewed assault came even as Ukrainian authorities confirmed the full restoration of the national energy system following a recent technical failure, highlighting a shift in Moscow's focus towards disrupting transport and supply chains. The Ukrainian president said the update followed a high-level coordination call involving security, defense, and infrastructure. He also noted that while the power system is currently stable, the broader security and humanitarian situation remains severely strained due to the ongoing Russian strikes and extreme winter conditions. Okay, of course, this comes as they have announced trilateral talks in Abu Dhabi, which are coming on the 3rd and the 4th of this month. They're set to discuss an end to the war. President Zelensky will be bringing that security guarantees document with him, as well as other issues. But the sticking point, of course, remains territory, the Donbass. As Russia does advance it, of course, it has not taken the entire region, but wants it all, something that it hopes to negotiate for Ukraine to concede, even though it doesn't occupy the entire region. But, of course, Eastern European winter continues to be prevalent across the region. We're now joined by Major General Sudhakar G, a senior strategic and international affairs expert, joining us live from Jaipur. Thank you very much for joining us here on NewsX World. Of course, now we've heard that Ukraine's has said that the Russian forces have intensified the attacks on Ukraine's logistics infrastructure for over 24 hours, with railway facilities emerging as the primary target. We've seen Russia target both the energy infrastructure, logistics hubs, but also civilian infrastructure in general. How does that fees for their tactics when it comes to weakening the morale of the Ukrainian people and their soldiers?
Yeah, good evening, Thomas. Is that question for me?
Yes, it is indeed.
A lot, because any kind of exchange of fire onto any of the sides definitely is going to impact the morale and motivation of the troops on ground, whether Russia is firing towards the Ukraine. The troops of Ukraine are in fact going to be impacted, and so is the case Ukrainians firing towards Russia. The issue here is that if peace has to come about, then I think the start point should be the ceasefire, the freezing of all kinds of fighting activities. All guns must go absolutely silent. That's the only way to go ahead in the peace proposal. Otherwise, we'll be going round and round and without making any headway. Back to Thomas.
Indeed. Do stay with us, Major General G, as we move on to the diplomatic updates coming out of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. And Russia's Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev has warned that the expiry of the New START treaty without a replacement should alarm the world. Speaking to Reuters and Russian media, Medvedev said the end of the last remaining US-Russia nuclear arms control agreement would leave the biggest nuclear powers without any limits for the first time since the early 1970s. While stopping short of predicting immediate nuclear war, Medvedev said the absence of constraints would undermine global stability. He stressed that arms control treaties are not vital for only limiting warheads, but also for verification, transparency, and maintaining a basic level of trust between nuclear powers at a time of heightened geopolitical tensions. Let's listen in.
Рубежная дата, ну вы знаете, наше предложение, оно остается на столе, и даже договор формально еще не истек, что если американская сторона захочет продлить, то это можно сделать, но в конечном счете мы оказываемся в ситуации, я начал тоже об этом думать, вот вся моя жизнь, ну начиная с 1972 года, прошла под зонтиком договора об ограничении стратегических наступательных вооружений, как бы он ни назывался. Почти 60 лет у нас не было ситуации, когда бы стратегические ядерные потенциалы не были ограничены чем-то. А сейчас такая ситуация возможна. Я не хочу сказать, что это сразу означает катастрофу и начнется ядерная война, но это все-таки должно всех настораживать. И вот эти самые часики, которые тикают, они в этом случае, ну, очевидно, должны опять же ускориться, потому что понятно, что вот эти потенциалы, количество боеголовок, развернутых носителей, это лишь способ контролировать ситуацию, но не решить проблему в целом. Но все-таки это способ верификации намерений друг друга. Если хотите, в чем-то, даже при всех издержках, это все-таки элемент доверия.
We're now joining by Sander van Hoorn, a former EU correspondent, joining us live from Amsterdam in the Netherlands. The START treaty, do you expect it to be signed once again, especially given the Trump administration's relationship with Moscow concurrently?
That's a big question. It all depends, of course, of one unreliable actor in this game, which is Donald Trump. No way of telling if he would want to re-sign the START treaty and if his contacts with Russia will allow it. I think deep down, both parties may want to restart it because the uncertainty of nuclear proliferation is just too big. But it all comes down, of course, as in with many things, to a matter of trust. Do parties trust each other enough to sign it again? And that trust, of course, is one of the big issues in the world where other conflicts are also playing out. For example, in Ukraine, that is like a disturbing factor when it comes to renegotiating the START treaty.
There's no binding caps on US and Russian nuclear arsenals for the first time since the 1970s. What does a world... what does a world without any legally binding limits actually look like in practical terms?
Well, it comes down to the guarantee, if you like, of mutual guaranteed destruction, what you have to rely on. So then you will have to rely on the fact that one party is too afraid to use nuclear weapons because they know that the other party has second strike capability, so they know they can hit back no matter what you hit in the first strike, and that your country will be basically destroyed as well. But that's a deterrent that is there, and it's very powerful, maybe as powerful as any treaty. The problem is that while you have nuclear proliferation, you can make mistakes. So mistakes can be made. for example, over Ukraine, for example, if there's a Russian move on any of the Baltic states, mistakes can be made, and that can easily escalate to the nuclear level. And that's something that a treaty can prevent, and that the lack of a treaty cannot prevent. So that's the real danger, I think.
Sander, of course, this was curated after the Cold War between the United States and Russia. However, China is not part of New START. Is it realistic to really imagine any future control architecture that doesn't include Beijing?
I don't see that happening, but there are more countries that are not included. Israel, for example, you have two nuclear powers, India and Pakistan. You have Northern Korea as a nuclear power. So you will have to rethink the way that those treaties work. And START, of course, was conceived in a world where we just came out of the Second World War. So the thought then at that time was never again, never again two big countries fighting each other, never again a lawless world order. Well, yeah, look at the world now. I mean, the old concepts basically are dead, so new concepts have to arise. And any nuclear new concept will have to include China and India and Pakistan, preferably any nuclear power in the world. But the question is, will it?
Do stay with us, Sander, as we move on to our next update. And of course, developments about the Epstein files. Lord Mandelson has resigned from the Labour Party, saying he wants to avoid causing further embarrassment. The move follows the release of new documents linked to Jeffrey Epstein by the US Justice Department. The files appear to show 3 separate payments of $25,000 each, allegedly sent by Epstein in 2003 and 2004. Lord Mandelson has denied any knowledge or recollection of the payments and has questioned the authenticity of the documents. He said his decision to quit the party was also intended to acknowledge the suffering of victims whose voices, he said, were ignored for too long. Lord Mandelson previously stepped down as Britain's ambassador to the United States over his association with Epstein. Sander van Hoorn joins us once again to discuss this. Britain's former US ambassador has previously denied knowledge of these payments, but he resigned to avoid embarrassment. Does stepping away acknowledge political responsibility, even if legal guilt is still unproven here?
So basically, this is causing a turmoil not only in the UK, but for example, also in Norway, and the association with Epstein is damaging already. So we've seen the British royal family basically taking very long with their former prince before he was made to resign from public life, basically. And I think people now feel the pressure to move swiftly.
Indeed. And of course, Mandelson is among a flurry of other individuals that have been named in these files. It ranges from Norway, as you've said, to the likes of Slovakia, particularly in Europe. Of course, many European officials and United States ones as well. What are your thoughts on the idea that, of course, things are hinted at, but the Department of Justice has said there are going to be no prosecutions following the release of these files. This is indeed all we're getting. Do you think that the US public will be satisfied, the European public will be satisfied by this release?
Well, there are two different questions, of course. The US public has a different relation with Epstein. So I think there will always be this hint about what are they hiding? Are they hiding something? If so, whom are they protecting? So that's the discussion, I guess, in the US. Here in Europe, it's something different. If you look, for example, at the situation in Norway, there has been email traffic, not really clear what it was about, if they ever met each other. However, the fact that this email conversation took place after Epstein was convicted in 2008, that shows at least, no matter what the content of the emails are, a lack of judgment on behalf of the person communicating with Epstein. And look, building networks, that was the core of Epstein's business, if you like. So emailing him, contacting him may for some people have been a way to reach other people, to do business, to get in touch with other people. But doing that with a person whom you know has a conviction for sexual offenses, that's something else. And that's basically defining the discussion in the UK and in Norway as of now.
Sander Van Hoorn, thank you very much for taking the time and joining us. It's always a great pleasure to speak to you here on the broadcast. We now move on to our next story, and the United Nations World Food Programme says it is scaling up to deliver life-saving food assistance to reach 450,000 people affected by the country's worst flooding in decades. This comes just after Mozambicans recovered from the worst drought in its recent history. Severe flooding in central and southern Mozambique has impacted nearly 700,000 people, forcing over 100,000 into temporary accommodation centres. Around 15,000 kilometres of roads are now impassable, disrupting key supply routes and isolating vulnerable groups. WFP is using specialised amphibious vehicles, boats, heavy-duty trucks, fixed-wing aircraft and helicopters to reach the impacted communities with food and nutrition assistance. Let's in fact listen into what the WFP Mozambique country director has said.
The waterfall that you see behind me is actually Xai-Xai's main city. Xai-Xai is the provincial capital, and so on this road you had banks, you had gas stations, you had supermarkets, and all this has been underwater for a week now. WFP has been here also from day one supporting the government's efforts, and the food is reaching people in very difficult to reach areas. We're using all means possible to do so, including amphibious vehicles.
Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
Hello and welcome. I'm Thomas Porteous and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of the hour. Iran denies receiving any ultimatum from President Trump on negotiations. Meanwhile, Tehran summons EU ambassadors after the bloc labels the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist group. Israel says the Rafah crossing will open today for limited medical transfers from Gaza. Only 150 people a day are allowed to exit, with 50 permitted to enter from Egypt. Russia says its offer to extend New START limits remains on the table with the United States. Moscow calls territory the hardest issue in Ukraine talks and rejects any NATO force presence there as three sides gear up for new talks in Abu Dhabi. Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte faces fresh impeachment complaints. Activists allege corruption and abuse of trust as she eyes the 2028 presidency. Right-wing candidate Laura Fernandez wins Costa Rica's presidential election in a landslide. She secures a first-round victory after pledging a hard crackdown on violence linked to drug trafficking. Former UK ambassador to the US, Peter Mandelson, resigns from the Labour Party. The move follows fresh reports about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Bad Bunny uses his Grammy acceptance speech to denounce US immigration raids. The Puerto Rican star tells the crowd migrants are human and American too. China executes 4 members of the Bai family mafia linked to scam centres in Myanmar. The move is part of a broad crackdown on transnational fraud networks. We start this hour with some breaking news coming in from East Asia, and China's former Justice Minister Tang Yujun has been sentenced to life in prison over taking bribes. Earlier in 2024, the Central Commission for Discipline Inspection of China had accused Tang of helping family members secure financial deals and accepting lavish gifts and expenses. He was accused of violating the Communist Party's code of conduct and was consequently expelled from the party. Tang allegedly sought to benefit others in personal appointments by accepting bribes, used his position to help family members secure business contracts, and intervened in market activities and judicial matters. We'll bring you all the news coming out of Beijing in terms of that story as soon as we get it. But now over to West Asia, and Iran has said that a framework for negotiations with the United States is expected to be finalised in the coming days, while firmly denying reports of any ultimatum from President Donald Trump. Speaking from Tehran, the Foreign Ministry spokesman Ismail Baqai said Iran has not received any ultimatum on talks. He added that regional countries are acting as mediators in the exchange of messages and that several points have already been addressed. According to Baqai, the details of each stage in the diplomatic process are now being examined and finalised. Meanwhile, President Trump has said he hopes to reach a deal with Tehran even as the United States continues to strengthen its military presence near the Islamic Republic. Joining us now to discuss the ongoing situation in the Middle East and its tensions with Washington is Peter Baum, the editor of the Weekly Blitz, joining us live from London. Thank you very much for joining us, Peter. It's a pleasure to talk to you. Of course, we've seen a war of words between the US president and Iranian officials, including, of course, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. Is this the opening of real diplomacy here after weeks of the sparring matches, or simply managed de-escalation under threat?
It could be either, Thomas. The best outcome for the Trump administration would be regime change without firing a shot. Trump and the European Union, and indeed Russia and China, recognise that Iran is probably at its weakest ever, militarily and politically, for, let's be realistic, since 5 decades. Added with the domestic insurgency and what we've seen over the weekend with the explosions, Trump's has all the aces in his hand, and the Iranians have very, very little. So if there is to be a diplomatic outcome via negotiations, then it will probably be so unpalatable for the Iranians because, as I've just said, Trump is in a dominant position, building up forces. Politically, Iran are isolated. Domestically, as we know, there's virtually a revolution going on. So it's difficult to see what the Iranians would be able to achieve from a diplomatic solution. Will Trump allow them to stay in power and give up their nuclear, providing they gave up their nuclear weapons and perhaps had new elections, something like that? one doesn't know. But I think that the Trump will demand such decisive political realizations for the Iranians, it would be very hard for them to swallow. I believe that it will lead to some kind of military operation, because I don't think the Iranian mullahs will give up to the demands that President Trump is going to request of them.
Okay, Peter, do stay with us as we move on to another development from the region. And thousands of sick and wounded Palestinians are waiting anxiously as Israel reopens Gaza's Rafah border with Egypt for limited crossings. The terminal, closed for nearly 2 years, will operate about 6 hours a day. Only 150 people will be allowed to leave Gaza daily, while around 50 are expected to enter. The reopening allows an October ceasefire deal, but movement remains tightly restricted, with Israel retaining full control over the border. Many families hope to reunite despite Gaza's devastation, while others face life or death waits for treatment abroad. Health officials say at least 20,000 patients are still waiting evacuation, and some have already died while waiting. Joining us now once again is Peter Baum to discuss the ongoing situation in the enclave. Peter, I've spoken about this before, but of course, so the first phase, which is now done, called for unrestricted flow of aid into the enclave, yet humanitarian aid is still very much restricted. Of course, a famine is no longer declared there. However, the humanitarian crisis is still rife throughout the population of Gaza, with malnourishment very much still prevalent. Israel now letting a very limited opening of the Rafah corridor, a key and crucial place for humanitarian aid entering the enclave, but only limited. This is supposed to be unrestricted. Why is Israel still limiting these crossings?
Yeah, this will be a step-by-step process. When the when the Rafah crossing, when it was decided that it was going to be open, there was never any intent from either the Egyptian side or the Israeli side that there will be a free flow of goods and people. It was always going to be a step-by-step process. It's a start, Thomas. Obviously, from the Palestinian point of view, they would want it to be expedited and to allow more and more people through. If after the first couple of days, let's say a week, the crossings go through unhindered and without any cause for concern from Israelis being attacked from the Hamas operatives, I suspect that if we're talking about the same situation this time next week, it will be a much clearer, more transparent and more open situation, with many more people and goods going to and from. But at the moment, it would all the political analysts that I've spoken to, and indeed from colleagues in the Israeli press and in the Egyptian press, it was always going to be a step-by-step process. It's a start, but clearly, and from where we were, Thomas, it's quite remarkable that this has happened at all. But I would imagine in the days ahead, we'll see a much wider, more comprehensive free flow of goods and people.
Israel have all the hostages back, including those of the deceased. Health officials in the enclave saying 20,000 patients are still waiting evacuation, and with only 150 people allowed to leave per day. This isn't fast enough, really, is it? We've heard that some people have died from waiting. Do you think Israel will speed up the process anytime soon?
Yeah, I'm absolutely sure they will. I would put a warning signal about the numbers of people that are needing treatment and the numbers of people are dying, etc. It's rather similar to when we were speaking a few months ago about the number of people dying from famine, etc. There are restaurants opening in Gaza all the time now. There's sufficient food for everybody. In terms of the people who are sick and need treatment via the border crossing, yes, clearly more needed and more need to go through. But I suspect this will be done in the days ahead, provided, Thomas, there are no incidents at the border crossing. If you remember, when the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation were giving food out and taking over from other NGOs, there were incidents leading to deaths. We hope that this won't be the case in Rafah, and we do know that the Egyptians are also taking a very strong view regarding security on their side of the border. So, as I say, if we're speaking about the same issue this time next week, I suspect it will be a much better situation for all concerned.
Okay, Peter Baum, thank you very much for joining us. As always, it is a great pleasure to speak to you. We now move on and over to Eastern Europe, and Russia's Dmitry Medvedev has warned that nuclear weapons remain a last resort option if the country's survival is at stake. In an interview, he said that Russia acts strictly according to its nuclear doctrine, which outlines conditions under which nuclear arms can be used. Medvedev emphasized that while nuclear weapons are extremely dangerous for all humanity, no one should doubt that Russia would consider them if the nation faced an existential threat. We turn now to South Asia, and the Balochistan Liberation Army has claimed responsibility for a massive coordinated offensive across Pakistan's Balochistan province, allegedly killing more than 200 security personnel over a period of nearly 40 hours. The group said the attacks, called Operation Heroth Phase 2, targeted multiple districts and marked the first large-scale use of female suicide bombers. Pakistani authorities confirmed heavy fighting and said security forces killed at least 145 militants. Officials also reported civilian casualties after attackers disguised as civilians entered public places and used human shields. The violence highlights a sharp escalation in the long-running insurgency in Balochistan. Professor Veselin Popovsky joins us now, a professor and vice dean at Jindal Global Law School, joining us live from Thailand. Thank you very much, Professor Popovsky, for joining us. This was a significant operation. 145 what Pakistan calling militants, terrorists, dead over the span of 40 hours. What does this signify about the stability of the Balochistan region? Of course, a hub of insurgency and instability for decades now.
Oh yes, definitely for decades. It's a very long conflict. For I think there are 4 rounds of escalation, and since 2006, already 20 years ago, we have the 4th round of escalation. It's long, and there is no really much of a hope it will end soon, because of both sides giving absolutely no indication stopping doing that. On one side, the attacks on Pakistani forces by Balochistan Liberation Army, and on the other hand, the response to that by the official Pakistani army against what they call the terrorists of Balochistan. And yes, it's one of the longest conflicts in Pakistan, with no clear signals for any resolution. There is no dialogue whatsoever. It basically, both sides prefer to do the military options and not to negotiate any compromise. So we'll see probably more of this over the next years, I'm afraid.
As you've said, there seems to be not much effort to get this instability sorted. In Pakistan's largest province by area, it's also its poorest, with chronic underdevelopment despite major gas, coal, copper and gold reserves. And what does it say about the current way that this conflict is moving forward, that insurgency continues to operate in Balochistan, and that there seems to be no or not much interest from external actors to settle this dispute?
True, you're absolutely right, Thomas. There is not much interest internationally. In fact, I speak about this. There is no political interest in any other parts of the world in Balochistan. Left on its own, yes, the conflict has very little, as I mentioned, very little chances to have any progress very soon. You are right. It's one of the poorest parts of Pakistan, but with potentially possible reserves in resources and minerals. And for that matter, maybe that also explains the causes of conflict. Very often the causes of conflicts lie in some such opportunities to exploit mineral resources by insurgencies, and they would like to take control of those regions. Again, they can pretend some other reasons, some revenge, some frustrations from the past, some willingness to establish independent state. But obviously behind all of this are the resources, but also the violent methods that the Balochistan Liberation Army uses give even less sympathy. So in a way, nobody sympathizes with attempts to secessions. Moreover, when the violent means by killing people, and sometimes very many civilians also, doesn't really give a rise for sympathy, for international support, for international sympathy to independence of Balochistan. And we also know that the Pakistani state is absolutely cruel, and that they will also not consider any steps back, that they will continue to respond with strikes, with killing fighters. That's also the approach that Pakistan takes. So sadly to say, not much to expect here. It will be a prolonged, although not always we see that. So that's why we have several times, as I said, over the last decade, an escalation. But at the end of the day, yes, no prospect at the moment.
Professor Popovsky, finally, of course, the escalation comes with accusations of Pakistan claiming that India is financing certain proxy groups, and especially these Baloch insurgents inside Balochistan. A claim India denies, while Indian officials accuse Pakistan of using similar proxies against India. Where's the base in these accusations?
Again, that's not verified. These are accusations. There is no proof. There is no evidence. Unfortunately, it goes on for long. And as you mentioned, India also sometimes immediately raises those accusations every time there is a terrorist act in India. The first reaction is that Pakistan state, it could be Pakistan insurgent or terrorist, someone from Pakistan, but the question really is whether the state is involved. And for that matter, we don't know. We have no evidence to say that Indian state is involved in any sort of enough evidence to say that the Pakistani state, the state of Pakistan, is supporting some terrorist act in India. Yes, the relationship between India and Pakistan, notoriously for many decades, is kind of a ground for such mutual accusations that, again, do not bring to any solution. And it's better to have some restraint, some self-disciplines in those announcements. But again, both sides have a lot of nationalism, a lot of populism, and that kind of builds up mutual hatred and often unverified accusations continue.
Professor Veselin Popovsky, thank you very much for taking the time in joining us. Great pleasure to talk to you, as always. We now move on and over to the Pacific, and Philippine Vice President Sara Duterte is facing a new round of impeachment complaints, accused of betraying public trust, corruption and other crimes. Rights groups and activists filed the complaints following a similar bid last year that was blocked by the Supreme Court. Duterte, who is the frontrunner for the 2028 presidential election, denied the allegations. Her lawyer said that they are prepared to address the complaints through constitutional processes. Meanwhile, the move comes as Duterte remains in a bitter political battle with a former ally, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., who cannot run again but is expected to back a successor. The new effort faces stricter Supreme Court procedures in a Senate with more Duterte allies, making it a more challenging process. Well, that's all that we have time for this hour. Keep watching NewsX World for more international news updates.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of this, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta. You're watching the World Report. Let's start with a check of the top headlines this hour at NewsX World. Russia confirms talks with Ukraine and the United States will now take place Wednesday and Thursday in Abu Dhabi. The Kremlin says the shift is due to scheduling coordination between the three sides. Iran denies receiving any ultimatum from President Trump on negotiations. Tehran summons European Union ambassadors after the bloc labels the Revolutionary Guards a terrorist group. Israel says the Rafah crossing will open for limited medical transfers from Gaza. Only 150 people a day are allowed to exit, with 50 permitted to enter from Egypt. Drones target the airport in northeastern Kisangani in Democratic Republic of Congo. Local authorities say 8 drones are neutralized and no casualties are reported. China sentences former Justice Minister Tang Yijun to life in prison for bribery. The ruling is part of Beijing's broad anti-corruption drive. Right-wing candidate Laura Fernandez wins Costa Rica's presidential election in a landslide. She secured the first-round victory after pledging a hard crackdown on violence linked to drug trafficking. Former UK ambassador to the US Peter Mandelson resigns from the Labour Party. The move follows fresh reports about his links to Jeffrey Epstein. Bad Bunny uses his Grammy acceptance speech to denounce US immigration raids. The Puerto Rican star tells the crowd migrants are human and American. And let's start with the top focus now. US President Donald Trump's senior envoy Steve Witkoff is set to visit Israel starting the 3rd of February. He will meet Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel's military chief amid heightened tension with Iran. The visit is seen as preparatory for potential talks between the US and Iran over the nuclear dispute. Israeli officials said Witkoff's meetings follow a weekend discussion in Washington between Israeli and US military chiefs. Tension is rising in the region after a US military build-up near Iran and recent deadly domestic unrest there. The Trump administration continues to push for a resolution to the ongoing Gaza war alongside regional diplomacy. Dr. Emmanuel Navo, International Relations Lecturer at Tel Aviv University and Senior Fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, joins us in this conversation from Tel Aviv.
Good afternoon.
Very good evening from here in India. Dr. Navo, thanks very much for joining us. How do you view, what do you think are going to be the key talking points when this engagement takes place?
Well, it's no secret that the United States is amassing a huge
All right, we seem to have encountered a network issue with our guest there. Viewers, we'll try to fix that connection, but let's give you more details. Steve Witkoff, Trump's senior envoy, is all set to visit Israel from 3rd of February, and there he will be meeting Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, and his military chief, as tensions with Iran are rising. This visit is of course seen as a preparation for the potential talks between Iran and US, and let's remind you, earlier today Iran has signaled its willingness to have nuclear negotiations with the United States. This of course is as the US is moving its troops, its USS Abraham Lincoln and aircraft in the Middle East. Israeli officials are saying that Witkoff's meetings follow a weekend discussion in Washington between Israeli and US military chiefs. As of now, following the US military build-up near Iran and recent deadly domestic unrest in the country, tension is on an escalation. Trump administration is pushing for a resolution also to the Gaza war alongside regional diplomacy. So Iran and Gaza war ceasefire are some of the important talking points that we can expect during this meeting between Witkoff and Israeli Prime Minister and military chief. Of course, the outcomes will only be made clear once that engagement takes place. And we now move on, viewers. Now, Gaza's Rafah border crossing with Egypt will allow 150 Palestinians to enter on Monday. Egyptian officials said 50 patients will travel with 2 companions each, while another 50 will enter Gaza from Egypt. Earlier reports said the crossing would operate in both directions, closing by 3 p.m. local time. Ali Shaat, head of Gaza's Palestinian Technocratic Committee, called the reopening a window of hope for the territory. He said the move is more than administrative, marking a step toward reconnecting communities and easing humanitarian pressures. The Rafah crossing is the main gateway between Gaza and Egypt and reopened in a limited capacity earlier today. All right, viewers, after much pressure, of course, Israel has opened the Rafah crossing with Egypt, and only 150 people are being allowed to cross as of now, and these of course include from either side. 50 patients will travel with 2 companions each from Egypt, and 50 will enter Gaza from Egypt. Dr. Emmanuel Navo, International Relations lecturer at Tel Aviv University and Senior Fellow at Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security, joins us from Tel Aviv. Dr. Navo, thanks very much. We're now talking about the Rafah crossing that has opened. Only a limited number of people are being allowed to take the route, 50 from either side. What do you think are going to be some of the challenges on the ground when the patients travel, from the side of Israel and Gaza?
Well, this is a gesture made by Israel in the framework of the ceasefire agreement that was brokered by mostly the United States. Of course, the main reason why the Rafah crossing was closed in the past 2.5 years is because it had been used by Hamas, not of course for humanitarian purposes, but for military purposes. And the Rafah crossing had become the major import route for weapons for Hamas. So it is to be hoped that the reopening of the crossing at this point will be only used for humanitarian and medical purposes and not for military ones.
What do you think are some of the measures that Israel is likely to take if the purpose of opening the crossing, which like you said is medical reasons, is violated or not adhered to?
Well, Israel, of course, together with its allies, especially with the U.S. Government, will monitor the use of the Rafah crossing and make sure that there's no attempt to use that strategic point between Egypt and the Gaza Strip to import illegal weapons, missiles, and material meant to rebuild tunnels, which unfortunately is exactly what Hamas has been doing for the past nearly 2 decades. So, as I said, we are in a phase of ceasefire and reconstruction where every move taken by Israel has, of course, to be carefully monitored in order to make sure that Hamas doesn't use those gestures meant for the civilian population in order to reorganize and regroup for military purposes.
And what's your knowledge of how many days is this crossing going to remain open for now?
So no date has been given so far. It's open-ended. It's been decided to reopen it, and as I said, to monitor the use of that crossing. In fact, if the crossing is indeed used for humanitarian and health purposes, medical purposes, then there will be no reason to close it again. And of course, everything will depend on whether or not Hamas tries to use that, that crossing point for military purposes.
Dr. Navo, has the movement of patients already started there?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Has the movement of patients already begun?
I believe so. I think, of course, given the fact that a lot of the hospital and medical infrastructure in the Gaza Strip has been destroyed as a result of the war, there's definitely a need for alternative medical facilities in Egypt, and hence the fact that many Gazans are actually moving to Egypt for the medical care, which is, of course, something that Israel is interested in promoting. And Israel has always said, and will continue to say, that as long as the purpose of the use of the Rafah crossing is for medical purposes, of course, Israel will enable the residents in need of medical care to use that crossing and to enter the Egyptian territory.
Finally, Professor Navo, what's your opinion of the Board of Peace and the current round of ceasefire that's finally being arrived at? Phase 2, all the criteria for round 1 of the ceasefire were met. We're now seeing readiness for phase 2. How are things there on ground?
Israel has made it very clear that in order to move forward with the peace plan of President Trump, supervised by the Board of Peace, Hamas must be demilitarized. I mean, the Gaza Strip has to be demilitarized, and Hamas has to lay down its arms. This is a very clear condition as far as Israel is concerned in order to move to the next phases of the peace plan. With regard to the Board of Peace, it's very clear that it is a welcome move in terms of providing an alternative, a de facto alternative to the United Nations, which is inefficient, corrupt, and morally bankrupt. And I think it's about time to provide practical alternatives to this organization, which has failed every test of the international order since the end of the Cold War, and has been hijacked by the world's worst dictatorships in order not to promote international law and human rights, but in fact to shield themselves from those principles.
Right, Dr. Navo, thanks very much then for joining me in this discussion. And viewers, let's also tell you that Palestinians in Gaza are welcoming the reopening of the Rafah crossing, hoping for more aid and medical access for treatment abroad. The crossing is the only route in or out for over 2 million residents. It's been mostly closed during the war. Let's listen into some of the reactions that are coming in from the locals there.
نتمنى من معبر رفح يكون يفتح ويكون سهل للمرضى المتجهين للعلاج في داخل مصر. احنا رجعنا منذ ال80 وال85 وال90 في نفس الحلبات والبوابات، وحنرجع معاناة تاني للمرضى للسفر في داخل مصر، وهذا مرفوض لأنه المريض طالع يتعالج مو طالع يتفتش. انت ارجع، انت ضل، انت مش عارف ايش، انت عليك امنيات، انت كذا، انت فهذا احنا مرفوض اطلاقا من هذا الكلام.
احنا مبسوطين بفتح المعبر، وان شاء الله يا رب يفتح بزياده، ان هيك خلي كل حاجه نقصت علينا في اثناء الحرب كلها تخش علينا بدعم، واحنا عايزين دعم اكثر من غاز، من مأكولات، من طحين، من سيج، من جميع الاشياء، من خيار، من حرامات، من فراش، من كل حاجه. نحمد الله يا رب اللي يفتح بزيادة إن شاء الله ويضلوا فاتح، وننسى أجواء الحرب اللي إحنا لسه مش صحيين منها.
And we now move on. Viewers, US President Donald Trump has announced a $12 billion initiative aimed at securing a strategic critical mineral stockpile known as Project Vault. The goal is to protect US manufacturers from supply shocks while reducing reliance on China for rare earth metals and other essential minerals. The project will combine $1.67 billion in private capital with a $10 billion loan from the US Export-Import Bank. These minerals will be stored and distributed to industries like automakers, tech companies, and other manufacturers. The plan represents a historic move, as it would be the first ever stockpile of its kind for the US private sector. All right. Joining me now in this discussion is Peter Cardillo. He's chief economist at Spartan Capitals and joins us from New York. Thanks very much, Mr. Cardillo, for joining us. Firstly, of course, US is moving towards protectionism of its resources, but what it is its current reliance on China for the rare earths?
Well, I think this announcement is a big deal in the sense that, you know, President Trump has always been eyeing to build up rare earth minerals, and so this is a fairly big deal, and you know, it just simply means that if it goes to fruition, that there's going to be a big race to grow stockpiles, and that's positive because obviously many of the rare materials are used for industrial purposes, and so it's a great need.
Right. Talking about the execution of it, what really do we know about Project Vault as of now?
Well, I think that that's, you know, basically goes hand in hand. So it's no secret that this administration wants to build up the strategic reserves, and because we're lacking them, and so I think it's, you know, a fairly big announcement for the industry in itself.
All right, sure. How much is US going to be self-dependent or cut off that reliance, and what does it really need? How much of rare earths would it still really require if it gets some access to resources and rare earths of Greenland?
Well, obviously, you know, I think one of the main aims of getting Greenland is obviously for this reason. And so it could be very prosperous for Greenland and, of course, for the United States.
And how is the market situation doing right now after this announcement? Because stocks are soaring, if we're right on that.
Could you repeat that? I didn't.
How
get
is the
that.
stock market reacting to the announcement, Mr. Cardillo?
Well, I'm looking at some of the rare earth material stocks, and they're all pretty much up in the pre-market. So they are welcoming this news.
All right, sure. Mr. Cardillo, thanks then very much for weighing in your opinion here. And we now move on, viewers. Let's also tell you that Russia's Security Council Deputy Chairman Dmitry Medvedev has dismissed Western claims of a Russian or Chinese threat to Greenland as nothing more than horror stories. He said these warnings were invented by Western leaders to justify their own actions and policies. Speaking from his residence outside Moscow, Medvedev added that while the issue poses a serious challenge to Atlantic unity, it does not mean conflict is inevitable. He suggested that everything could still proceed according to a calmer scenario before any military intervention or fighting breaks out within the NATO bloc. All right, viewers, Medvedev now saying claims of Russian threat to Greenland are false. Of course, this is not the first time that that statement has come in from the Russian leaders. But once again, Russia's Security Council Deputy Chairman has dismissed Western claims of a Russian or Chinese threat to Greenland. And he said that it's nothing more than horror stories. Let's remind you, viewers, that Donald Trump has time and again said that his bid to acquire Greenland is to prevent Russia and China from taking over the Arctic territory, the largest autonomous island in the world. Russia's Security Council Deputy Chairman has said that these warnings were invented by Western leaders to justify their own actions and policies. This, of course, is coming after the European Union also increased its troop deployment to Greenland. But speaking from his residence outside Moscow, Medvedev added that while the issue poses a serious challenge to Atlantic unity, it does not mean a conflict may be inevitable. All right, Mr. Cardillo, I request you to join us back in the discussion here. Mr. Cardillo, once again, Russia has issued the statement to say that the stance that the European leaders have taken over Greenland and the accusations that have come in of a Russian or a Chinese threat to Greenland are all false. This is not surprising, but how do you see it having a larger impact on the geopolitics of Greenland at a time when NATO is rushing to its defense?
Well, I think that President Trump is going to probably make a deal. He's basically said over and over again that he's not going to use force, and of course there'll be accusations coming from perhaps Russia. But I think that at the end, there will be some sort of a deal. Again, as I said at the beginning of the program, that the aim of the United States is to get their hands on rare materials. And so I think that that's going to be a key point in negotiating, which could very well be could be beneficial not only to the United States, but to Greenland itself. So again, I don't think force will be used. I think there will be diplomatic discussions and some sort of an agreement will be reached.
All right, hopefully indeed, Mr. Cardillo, thanks very much for joining us and for speaking to us. Viewers, there's also a statement that's coming, let's hear it.
Про Гренландию долго рассуждать не буду. Президент недавно наш сказал о том, что это вообще не наша тема. Это вот пусть Соединенные Штаты с европейцами разбираются. Но сам по себе вот этот казус, он тоже весьма и весьма такой любопытный, поскольку в последние, во всяком случае, десятилетия ничего подобного не происходило. Сейчас происходит. Это действительно для атлантического единства, так называемого, довольно серьезный вызов. Значит, нам очевидны и понятны тоже резоны, которые называет президент Трамп. Часть из них, конечно, не существует. Это угроза со стороны России и Китайской Народной Республики. Значит, такая страшилка, которая используется для того, чтобы объяснить то или иное поведение.
And we now move on to cover some news from Norway, where Norwegian police has said that the son of Norway's future queen, who will go on trial for rape this week, has been arrested on suspicion of assault, making threats and violating a restraining order. As per the police statement, they had requested that Høiby be remanded in custody for 4 weeks on the grounds of risk of reoffending. Høiby has admitted to some minor offences but denies the more serious charges. In the case, several ex-girlfriends are now plaintiffs against him, and he is under strict orders to not contact them. Høiby faces up to 16 years in prison if the Oslo District Court finds him guilty. In a rare statement, Crown Prince Haakon said that he and Mette-Marit do not plan to attend court and that the royal house does not intend to comment during the proceedings. He emphasized that Høiby is not part of the royal house and that as a citizen of Norway, he has the same responsibilities and rights as all others. He said that he is confident that all concerned will make the trial as orderly, proper and fair as possible. Ahead of the trial, in the recent release of the batch of documents from the Epstein files, shone an unflattering spotlight on Mette-Marit. They contain several hundred mentions of the crown princess, who already said in 2019 that she regretted having had contact with Epstein. And viewers, that's all we have time for. Thanks for watching NewsX World. For all international news and updates.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the U.S. a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists.
What we can do as the Interparliamentary Union to strengthen democracy, to promote human rights, to ensure that humanitarian law is respected.
UN Security Council needs a makeover, a comprehensive reform, and India deserves a position there, a role there.
Prime Minister Modi during Operation Sindoor made it amply clear that war has never been India's choice. We are with the side of peace. We are neither neutral nor indifferent. We are with peace.
We would have dealt with the US a whole lot on trade and those kinds of things, and that's not as certain these days. So we have to go back and look at our European partners, our Asian partners.
An opportunity to exchange, to have a dialogue, to have a debate on a different perspective on finding the solution of the conflict.
First thing that is important to have a common ground, and that we do have with humanitarian laws and human rights, but also to say, okay, what does it mean for us as a country to act on these laws, and how can we work together?
When we realize that there's something wrong with democracy, the institutions and policies, values come together and we take stock, and it's possible then to improve and chart a new course for democracy.
It's the people's right to self-determination, and if they want to be independent, they should be independent. We will not start a war against Greenland.
Hello and welcome. I'm Kriti Mehta and you're watching the world of sports on NewsX World. Let's take a look at some of the top sports stories of the week. Spanish sensation Carlos Alcaraz defeated the veteran Novak Djokovic in 4 sets in a pulsating final, claiming his first Australian Open title and shattering an 88-year-old record to become the youngest to win a career Grand Slam. Liverpool seem to have successfully pulled off the first big-name hijack on this deadline day, with a French prodigy Jeremy Jacquet now headed to Anfield instead of Chelsea's Stamford Bridge. LeBron James has been selected for a record-extending 22nd consecutive NBA All-Star game. The LA Lakers star has been named among the reserves from the Western Conference. England's Justin Rose clinched an utterly dominant win at the Farmers Insurance Open in a new tournament record score. The 2019 winner signed for a 2-under par 70 to claim his 13th PGA Tour title. Winter Olympics organizers have admitted the new ice hockey arena in Milan will not be finished in time for the first match of the Games, but are absolutely certain all scheduled fixtures will be played there. And now for a special feature of this week. Today on the show we have a trailblazer, a pioneer, and quite possibly the coolest skier you've ever heard of. From the sun-soaked streets of Dakar in Senegal to the icy slopes of the Winter Olympics, Lamine Gueye has defied expectations and redefined what it means to chase dreams. He's faced doubt, blizzards, and the world's most intimidating ski courses. And today he joins us to talk about his journey, his new documentary, and what it takes to represent Africa on the global winter sports stage. Lamine Gueye is the president of the Senegalese Ski Federation, and thanks for joining us here at NewsX World of Sport.
Thank you to you, my pleasure.
All right, now you grew up in Senegal, far from snow and winter infrastructure. What specific obstacles did you really face when you were entering professional skiing, and how did you overcome them at each stage of your career?
Well, keep in mind that at the beginning it was just a dream in the head of a teenager. So before even thinking about competing, I had to create the federation, because you can imagine that at the time there was no Senegal Ski Federation at all. So the first big task was to create the Senegal Ski Federation, like, you know, those kinds of paper you don't like to do now, but you didn't like to do it when you're 17 or 18 years old. So once this was done, I had definitely to find a way to get help, to get sponsors, to get advice on how to become a professional, let's say, a ski racer. So once my federation was active, I asked help from the French Ski Federation and from the Italian Ski Federation. And slowly, they helped me to, let's say, to go through the first steps. Parallel to that, I had to find like sponsors, ski material, money, anything, because when you start a dream like this, nothing is evident. And after, let's say, struggling for a few months or years, then I had finally the chance to be for the first time on the slopes and to enjoy my dream.
All right, interesting. Now, when you first competed at the Olympics, what was the biggest reality check that you really faced on and off the slopes compared with athletes from traditional winter sports nations?
Well, my first Olympics was Sarajevo. So, you know, we all remember our first times, whatever it is. And my first time in the Olympic in Sarajevo was very special. It was special because I arrived here like very young. I was 24 years old. And then my head was full of dreams, Olympic dreams, the fact that you can be with many people from all around the world doing the same thing. But I had to face reality, and reality was I was a one-man team, meaning I had to be present on the slopes for the race or for the training. I had to prepare my skis, I had to go for the captain's meeting, I had to go for the interview, I had to go for the official things regarding the Olympics issues. I remember once when I arrived in Sarajevo, I even had to go and to make sure that they had the national anthem from Senegal. And I told them, what's the national anthem for? And they answered me, it's in case you win. I said, okay, I recognize the anthem, but the chance for me to win are very small.
Yeah, okay. Now looking back at your Olympic appearances, how did your mindset and preparation have evolved, and which Olympics really tested you the most, both as an athlete and as an individual?
Well, as I told you, the first one was Sarajevo, so my head was full of dream. Let's say I was expecting a kind of an Olympic dream. That was partially here, but not there, because then you face reality, like no money for training from the International Olympic Committee and those things. The second one was Albertville, 1992, a very, very, very challenging slope. Only a few racers were starting with the downhill, only the professional were there and me. So it was very challenging from the physical point of view and technical point of view. The third games, it was in Lillehammer, and it was after the new rules for the small nations. So I would say that I attempted these games with a different mindset, keeping in mind that it was not going to be easy anymore for the small nations to compete in the Olympic Winter Games.
Now, now your new documentary revisits moments of struggle, criticism, and resilience. Was there any part of your story you hesitated to put on screen? And if yes, what was that? Why was that?
Well, we started to shoot last week in Sarajevo, and I discovered a fantastic crew, and I told them exactly what was happening in my life and in my story. So they are trying to pull out the, let's say, the spirit behind the race. And the spirit was, you can come from another country that is not supposed to be a country with snow and do other things. Let's say I was trying to give this message that it doesn't matter where you come from. What's important is your desire to go through and your determination, I think.
Right, and winter sports, they remain marginal across most of Africa. What concrete changes are really needed, in your opinion, in funding, in training access and governance, really, to make African participation more sustainable rather than symbolic?
Well, we have to obey to different organizations that rule the sport. This organization is International Olympic Committee and International Ski Federation. I think it's good to have to remember what we're coming from. In 1984, every nation had 4 places at the Olympics, 4 places at the World Championship, and 2 places in the World Cup. Today, you need to go through qualifications, to go to Olympics, to go to World Championship, and to go through to World Cup. So it's getting harder and harder and harder for us. But the world is opening more and more. You have people from Africa, from other countries, traveling all around the world. I've been looking, there is people from India going to race at the Olympic in Milano Cortina. So the world is changing. And I think, especially in the world of chaos today, in my opinion, the Olympic Committee should say, listen, we are all here for the celebration of humanity. And that celebration means everybody is welcome. You cannot today, when you switch on your TV or your radio, or you're a news broadcaster, so you see the world, how it's going on, and it's getting a bit crazy. So more than ever today, I think Olympic Committee should work so much on inviting everybody to celebrate humanity.
Right, that's a great message. Now, with the Milan Cortina 2026 games approaching, what are your realistic expectations for yourself and for African representation? And what would success really look like to you at this point in time in your life?
Well, I don't think there will be many racers from African continent. There will be some, and from non-skiing continent, there will be some. But you know, Olympic Winter Games, you prepare that like years and years and years in advance. I hope these games are going to be fantastic and full of sport, and I hope that the spirit will be there. What is really important for me, I would like to hear, if I had, let's say, a dream, I'd like to see at the end of the games, you know, at the end of the Olympic Games, you have the closing ceremony and they say, okay, we give you appointment in 4 years for the next games. And the games in 4 years will be in France. In 2030. And France is also the country of the Déclaration des Droits de l'Homme that says that every man was born equals